Step into the world of Nurse Emily, where routine night shifts at St. Catherine's Hospital unveil an extraordinary journey of compassion and discovery. Assigned to Mrs. Elizabeth Anderson, a patient trapped in a vegetative state, Emily's meticulous care reveals subtle signs of responsiveness that defy medical expectations. Through music and attentive observation, Emily bridges the gap between patient and caregiver, delving into ethical dilemmas and the profound mysteries of consciousness. Join us as we witness Emily's transformative journey, navigating the complexities of patient care and forging unexpected connections that redefine the boundaries of medical science and human empathy. Hello, my friends. I hope all you are fine. This is Narrative Stories channel. Let's start this story. In the heart of St. Catherine's Hospital, where the corridors echoed with the soft hum of life support machines and the occasional shuffle of tired feet, Nurse Emily navigated through the late-night stillness. Her steps were measured, her gaze focused, embodying the dedication that marked her years of service in critical care. St. Catherine's was renowned for its specialized units, where patients in the most fragile states of health received round-the-clock attention. Emily's shift began as it always did, with the exchange of briefings among nurses and the passing on of responsibilities from the previous team. Tonight, she found herself assigned to Mrs. Elizabeth Anderson, a patient whose presence in the critical care unit had become a fixture over the years. Mrs. Anderson's room was a testament to the life she had led before tragedy struck. Adorned with photographs capturing moments of joy with her family, the walls softened the clinical atmosphere with a warmth that spoke of the love and hope of those who visited. Yet, Mrs. Anderson herself lay still, a casualty of a tragic car accident that had robbed her of consciousness for several years. Emily paused at the threshold of Mrs. Anderson's room, taking in the sight of the woman whose fate had become intertwined with her own nightly routine. She noted the familiar setup, IV drips, monitoring equipment, and the quiet rhythm of Mrs. Anderson's breathing, a reminder of the fragility and resilience that coexisted within the confines of the hospital walls. With practiced efficiency, Emily began her shift. She checked the monitors, ensuring that the lines depicting Mrs. Anderson's vital signs remained stable and within acceptable parameters. Adjusting the IV drip, she silently communicated her intent to provide comfort and care, even to a patient who could not respond in kind. As she worked, Emily's mind wandered to the nature of her role in caring for patients like Mrs. Anderson. How does one measure the impact of care when the recipient cannot acknowledge it? These were the questions that lingered in the quiet hours of the night, prompting Emily to reflect on the complexities of her profession. It was during one of these routine checks that Emily noticed a subtle change in Mrs. Anderson's demeanor. A flicker of eyelids, a slight twitch of fingers, small movements that seemed inconsequential to the untrained eye, yet spoke volumes to Emily's keen observation. She paused, her curiosity piqued by the possibility of responsiveness from a patient deemed unresponsive for so long. Brushing aside initial skepticism, Emily found herself increasingly attuned to these fleeting moments of potential communication. She documented each observation meticulously, building a case that challenged the conventional understanding of Mrs. Anderson's condition. Driven by a growing sense of responsibility and curiosity, Emily embarked on a quest for answers. She delved into Mrs. Anderson's extensive medical history, consulting with senior nurses and specialists in neurology. Their discussions traversed the intricate pathways of the human brain, exploring theories of residual consciousness and the potential for awareness hidden beneath layers of physical impairment. In the midst of medical discourse, Emily found herself drawn to the personal anecdotes shared by Mrs. Anderson's family during occasional visits. They spoke of her love for classical music, a passion that had once filled their home with melodies that now echoed in the sterile confines of the hospital room. Armed with this newfound knowledge, Emily took a leap of faith. She began to play Mrs. Anderson's favorite pieces softly in the background during her shifts, observing subtle changes in her patient's demeanor. The music became a conduit for connection, a bridge that spanned the divide between nurse and patient, offering moments of solace in the quiet of the night. Through the rhythm of the music, Emily sensed a deeper understanding blossoming between herself and Mrs. Anderson. She discovered a shared love for the arts, a bond that transcended the boundaries of consciousness as defined by medical textbooks. One night, as Emily sat by Mrs. Anderson's bedside during a rare moment of tranquility, she witnessed something extraordinary. Mrs. Anderson's eyes fluttered open, meeting Emily's gaze with a clarity that defied medical explanation. In that fleeting moment, Emily felt a surge of emotion, a silent acknowledgement that spoke volumes of their shared journey of discovery. It was a revelation that left Emily grappling with the implications of her experience. Could it be possible that Mrs. Anderson retained a fragment of awareness hidden beneath the layers of physical limitation? The question lingered in Emily's mind, shaping her perspective on the limits of medical science and the resilience of the human spirit. As Emily navigated the complexities of her newfound understanding, she found herself confronting ethical dilemmas that tested her professional integrity. She debated the extent of interventions and the level of care appropriate for patients like Mrs. Anderson, balancing the need for compassionate support with the boundaries of medical reality. The discussions echoed within the hospital corridors, sparking debates among colleagues and healthcare professionals alike. Emily's internal struggle mirrored the broader ethical debates surrounding end-of-life care and the rights of patients unable to advocate for themselves. In the quiet moments that followed, Emily reflected on her journey with Mrs. Anderson, a journey marked by moments of connection, discovery, and deepening empathy. She realized that while Mrs. Anderson may never regain full consciousness, her presence had left an indelible mark on Emily's heart and professional identity. Through Mrs. Anderson's silent journey, Emily had found closure in knowing that even in the absence of spoken words, there existed profound opportunities for human connection and understanding. She carried forward a renewed sense of purpose, advocating for the compassionate care of patients whose voices might otherwise go unheard. In the days that followed, Emily continued to care for Mrs. Anderson with unwavering dedication and compassion. She took solace in the knowledge that Mrs. Anderson's legacy lived on not only in the memories of her loved ones, but also in the lessons learned through her silent journey. Emily paid tribute to Mrs. Anderson's resilience and the profound impact she had on her own personal and professional growth. She shared her story with colleagues and students, imparting a message of hope and empathy for patients and families navigating similar challenges. The Quiet Observer, a nurse's journey into the mind of a silent patient, has been a narrative exploration of empathy, human connection, and the complexities of consciousness in healthcare settings. Through Emily's story, we have witnessed the transformative power of compassion and the profound impact of moments that defy medical understanding. This journey serves as a reminder that even in the quietest of moments, there lies an opportunity for profound human connection and understanding that transcends words and conventional wisdom. Emily's experience with Mrs. Anderson illuminates the path forward for healthcare professionals, advocating for the compassionate care and recognition of the inherent dignity of all patients, regardless of their ability to communicate verbally. Emily's journey continues to inspire, offering a glimpse into the vast potential of the human spirit to find solace and meaning in the most unexpected places. As she continues her work at St. Catherine's Hospital, Emily carries forward the lessons learned from Mrs. Anderson, a testament to the enduring legacy of empathy and compassion in the practice of healthcare. This narrative not only highlights the emotional and ethical dilemmas faced by healthcare professionals, but also underscores the importance of listening, observing, and honoring the silent voices that shape our understanding of patient care. Thank you for being a part of Narrative Stories. Your support and engagement mean the world to us. We are committed to bringing you the best in storytelling. What kinds of stories would you like to see next? Share your thoughts in the comments below.
I usually don't ask this early, but if you could like the video and subscribe, it would mean a lot. We're so close to hitting 1,000 subscribers, and your support can really help get my content out there. Thanks. It was the night of the most anticipated event of the year, the Von Euler Enterprises Annual Gala. A lavish affair hosted at Le Grand Palais, the most prestigious venue in the heart of Paris. The company had rented the grand ballroom, its high arched ceilings adorned with intricate gold moldings and massive chandeliers that sparkled like constellations. Every guest in attendance was dressed to perfection in the finest attire Parisian couture could offer. Wine flowed freely, and the hum of networking executives, laughter, and light conversations echoed off the marble floors. Alexandre Villeneuve adjusted his bow tie for what felt like the 100th time. At 34, he was a mid-level financial analyst at Von Euler Enterprises, which wasn't an insignificant achievement, but it was far from where he wanted to be. Alexandre was the kind of man who had always done things by the book, polite, reserved, and practical. He was tall, with dark hair that was just starting to thin at the top, but he kept himself in shape, if only because his wife Isabella was often surrounded by people much wealthier and more influential than him. His wife, Isabella de la Roche, was the reason he had reluctantly attended tonight's gala. At 30, she was stunning, with flowing auburn hair, soft porcelain skin, and piercing green eyes that could captivate a room. Isabella was the rising star of Von Euler Enterprises, having carved out a name for herself as an exceptional marketing executive. Unlike Alexandre, she thrived in high society events like this one. She wore a sleek black gown that hugged her curves perfectly, drawing more than a few admiring glances from the other guests. But tonight, Alexandre noticed something else in her demeanor, a certain restlessness that unsettled him. Their marriage, once filled with excitement, had become strained in recent years. Between her long hours at work, the constant traveling, and the social obligations that came with her career, they had drifted apart. Isabella had started coming home late more often, explaining it away as business dinners or late meetings. Alexandre wanted to believe her, though a nagging feeling in the back of his mind told him that something wasn't right. As they moved through the glittering crowd, making polite conversation with colleagues and clients, Alexandre found himself growing increasingly anxious. He was out of place here, amidst the titans of industry. This was Isabella's world, a world of money, power, and influence. Across the room, Maximilian von Euler, the 45-year-old CEO of the company, stood out like a king among courtiers. Tall, with broad shoulders and an aristocratic jawline, his salt and pepper hair gave him a distinguished air. He was dressed in a tailored tuxedo that probably cost more than Alexandre's annual salary. Maximilian was known for his ruthlessness in business and his charm with women. He was the kind of man who could command a room with just his presence, and tonight he was clearly the center of attention. Alexandre noticed Isabella's eyes dart toward Maximilian several times throughout the night. There was something in her gaze, something that made his stomach churn. She had mentioned before how much respect she had for Maximilian, how much she had learned from him. But the way her eyes lingered on him now felt different. "Darling, are you all right?" Alexandre asked quietly, leaning closer to Isabella as they stood near the champagne table. Isabella snapped out of her daze and smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Of course. Why wouldn't I be?" "You seem distracted." She chuckled, brushing off his concern. "It's just work. These events are exhausting, you know. Always having to impress, always putting on a show." Alexandre nodded, though he wasn't convinced. Before he could press further, a familiar voice interrupted them. "Well, well, Alexandre Villeneuve," came the smooth, commanding tone of Maximilian von Euler. "Enjoying yourself?" Maximilian appeared beside them, a glass of whiskey in hand and a smirk playing on his lips. Alexandra immediately felt the temperature in the room drop. He forced a polite smile and extended his hand. "Mr. von Euler, thank you for inviting us. The event is spectacular." Maximilian ignored the handshake, his eyes fixed on Isabella. "Ah, Isabella, you look stunning as always." Isabella flushed slightly under his gaze, and Alexandra's grip on his champagne glass tightened. There was a familiarity between them that made his heart race in all the wrong ways. "You're too kind, Mr. von Euler," Isabella replied, her voice soft but with a certain edge that Alexandra hadn't heard in a long time. Maximilian took a long sip from his glass, his gaze never leaving Isabella. "I must steal her away for a moment, Alexandra," he said, though it wasn't a request. "We have some business matters to discuss." Alexandra hesitated, his unease growing, but before he could object, Isabella touched his arm. "It's just a quick chat," she said, her smile reassuring. "I'll be back soon." And just like that, she was gone, swept away by Maximilian's magnetic pull. Alexandra watched as they moved through the crowd, the CEO leaning in close to speak to her, too close for comfort. As he stood there, alone and feeling more out of place than ever, Alexandra's mind raced. Was it just business? Or was there something more going on? He had always trusted Isabella, but lately, something had shifted between them. He couldn't shake the feeling that Maximilian had something to do with it. The night dragged on, and though Isabella eventually returned to his side, her mind seemed elsewhere. They mingled with other guests, exchanged pleasantries, but the connection between them felt strained, like a rope that had been frayed and was now on the verge of snapping. The gala continued in a blur of laughter, clinking glasses and the glow of chandeliers. But Alexandra was hardly present. His mind kept circling back to Maximilian's words, the way his wife had looked at him, and the creeping sense of betrayal he couldn't shake. Eventually, the night drew to a close. The ballroom began to empty as guests said their goodbyes and drifted off into the Parisian night. Alexandra and Isabella returned to their shared apartment in the 8th arrondissement, a luxurious space they had purchased during the early days of their marriage when life had seemed full of promise. But tonight, the apartment felt colder than usual. Isabella had gone straight to the bedroom, claiming she was exhausted. Alexandra, however, couldn't sleep. He sat in the living room, staring out the window at the twinkling lights of the Eiffel Tower in the distance. His mind replayed the events of the evening over and over again. He kept seeing the way Maximilian had spoken to Isabella, the way she had responded to him. Eventually, Alexandra couldn't take it anymore. He walked quietly down the hall and opened the door to their bedroom. Isabella was already in bed, her back turned to him, the covers pulled up to her shoulders. For a moment, he considered letting it go, but the words were already tumbling out of his mouth before he could stop them. "Isabella?" he said quietly. She didn't respond. "Isabella, are you awake?" She shifted slightly but didn't turn around. "What is it, Alexandra?" He hesitated, his heart pounding. "Is there something going on between you and Maximilian?" The question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Isabella didn't answer right away, and the silence felt like a confirmation of his worst fears. Finally, she sighed and sat up, turning to face him. Her expression was a mix of guilt and frustration. "What are you talking about?" "You know exactly what I'm talking about," Alexandra said, his voice shaking with a mixture of anger and hurt. "I've seen the way you look at him, the way he talks to you. Tonight, it was obvious." Isabella's eyes flashed with irritation. "Alexandra, you're being ridiculous. Maximilian is my boss. That's all." "Is that all?" Alexandra shot back, unable to contain the bitterness in his voice. "Because it doesn't look that way to me. It hasn't for a while now." Isabella's face softened for a moment, and she looked away, as if struggling to find the right words. "You're overthinking this. Yes, Maximilian and I are close, but it's just professional. We spend a lot of time together because of work, but that's it. But Alexandra could hear the hesitation in her voice, and it only fueled his suspicions. "Don't lie to me, Isabella," he said, his voice rising. "I deserve the truth." She looked at him then, her green eyes filled with a mixture of regret and resignation. And in that moment, Alexandra knew. The truth was written all over her face. "I'm sorry, Alexandra," she whispered, her voice barely audible. His heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. He had suspected it, but hearing the confirmation was like a punch to the gut. "How long?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Isabella looked down at her hands, unable to meet his gaze. "It's been going on for a few years," she admitted. "It started out as just a mistake, but then—" Alexandra felt like the ground had been pulled out from under him. The woman he had loved, the woman he had built a life with, had betrayed him in the worst possible way, and for years he had been living in the dark. Tears stung at the corners of his eyes, but he refused to let them fall. "How could you do this to me?" he asked, his voice cracking with emotion. "How could you throw away everything we've built?" Isabella looked up at him then, her own eyes filled with tears. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said, her voice trembling. "But Maximilian, he's powerful and— I don't know, Alexandra. I got caught up in it. I never wanted to hurt you." But she had hurt him, more deeply than she could ever understand. The following weeks were a blur of pain, anger, and confusion. Alexandra moved out of their apartment and filed for divorce. He couldn't bear to be near her anymore, knowing that she had chosen another man over him. But life went on, as it always does. Alexandra threw himself into his work, trying to rebuild his life piece by piece. The divorce was finalized quickly, and he never saw Isabella again. Maximilian von Eylor continued to run his empire, untouched by the scandal. To him, Alexandra had always been a small, insignificant man. But Alexandra realized that in walking away, he had gained something far more valuable than revenge: his freedom. And sometimes, that was the greatest victory of all. Thank you for reading this story. Do you think Alexandra made the right choice by walking away? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you like this story, please like, share, and subscribe for more gripping tales. See you next time.
I was jogging on the path between my small office and my house, roughly 2 miles away, spurred by frustration with some unfinished work tasks. After tinkering with it for about an hour, I swapped my jeans and work shirt for shorts, a t-shirt, sneakers, and a headband, and set off. My plan was to jog home to retrieve some paperwork, maybe 20 pages. When I was about half a mile from home, I spotted a guy about 200 yards ahead, an uncommon sight since this path was mainly used by me and rarely by others, leading directly to my house and bordered by a cliff at the back. He appeared to be cutting through toward the back of my house. Hastening my pace, I turned a corner to get a better look. He was at the back patio door, which to my surprise was unlocked. Pausing to consider what I had witnessed, I recalled that my wife, Alice, was working from home that day. Racing to the door, I found it locked, but naturally I had the key and used it. Silently sliding open the patio door, I peered inside. The kitchen, where Alice usually worked, was empty, but her work materials and laptop were sprawled across the table. Faint sounds emanated from upstairs, likely from the dining room adjacent to the kitchen. I kept a baton, reminiscent of those used by old-fashioned patrol officers, which had once belonged to my grandfather. It was both a tool of protection and a sentimental keepsake. Clutching the baton, I stealthily ascended the stairs. The door to the master bedroom was shut, with muffled noises emanating from within. Gripping the handle, I cautiously pushed it open. Imagine my shock. The runner's attire lay discarded on the floor as he poised to mount my wife, who was completely unclothed. Approaching the bed, I administered a swift strike to the man's rear with a baton, resulting in a resounding slap. He yelped, clutching his rear, while Alice stared wide-eyed, her arms, legs, and gaze all widened. She uttered something unintelligible. It dawned on me that this intruder was none other than her boss, Simon Green. Rolling away from Alice, he rose from the bed, nursing his injured rear. "Hold on. I was invited," he protested. Glancing at Alice, I was met with absolute silence. Simon issued a threat, asserting, "You'd better back off, or I'll take it from you and give you a smacking." Standing undressed in my bedroom, he exuded confidence. Yet he scarcely knew me, and I him. What he didn't realize was my proficiency in tennis, particularly my formidable backhand. Smirking at him, I detected a flicker of agitation. With a roar, he lunged at me from about 6 feet away. Swiftly, I delivered a backhand blow to his face. Caught off guard, he failed to evade it. The baton struck his forehead on the right side. I had aimed for his cheek, but his slight downward movement caused the misalignment. Collapsing like a sack of bricks, he remained motionless as I gazed down at him. I glanced at Alice. She appeared to be in a trance. Her eyes had a glassy look, and drool dribbled down her chin. Surveying the room, I spotted a cell phone on the dresser, positioned upright with the screen facing the bed. That idiot had recorded everything. Grabbing the phone, I flipped it to access the dial pad and called emergency. "What's your emergency?" "My name is Tim Jenkins. I'm at 12 Arbor Circle. An intruder attacked me in my bedroom. I defended myself. He's hurt, possibly seriously. And my wife, I don't know, maybe on medications. She's conscious, but not responsive. We need help right away. Sir, if you're armed, please disarm yourself. We'll approach cautiously. Do you understand?" "Yes, I understand. I'll wait in the front yard." As sirens wailed, I descended the stairs, phone still in hand. Placing the baton on the sofa, I stepped outside. Standing in the front yard, arms at my sides, I watched as a police car arrived, followed by an ambulance. 2 officers, a man and a woman, emerged, neither drawing their weapons. The woman, appearing to be in charge, addressed me. "Are you Mr. Jenkins?" "Yes. They're upstairs. Follow me." I turned and re-entered the house, the officers trailing behind me. Leading them to the bedroom, I stepped aside. The door was ajar. Alice lay on the bed, vacant-eyed. Green remained motionless. A female officer knelt by Green, checking his pulse and instructing another officer to summon paramedics. Turning her attention to Alice, she asked, "Ma'am, are you all right, ma'am?" No response. As the paramedics arrived, I stepped back, allowing them to attend to Green. Another group of medical personnel followed suit. Sergeant Leslie Haddon retrieved a robe from the closet, dressed Alice, and guided her to the guest bedroom, gesturing for me to follow. "Stay here. Don't leave, but keep out of the way," she directed. I retreated to the kitchen, scanning the surroundings. Using a small computer from my desk drawer, I transferred the video from Green's phone and backed up its contents. Sending the video to my office via email, I powered down the phone and left it on Alice's desk. From the kitchen entrance, I observed as the paramedics transported Green out the front door, loaded him into the ambulance, and sped away. An unfamiliar policewoman guided Alice to the living room, keeping her apart from me. Alice walked with her head down, clad in a robe and sneakers. Sergeant Haddon joined me in the kitchen, accompanied by the plainclothes detective, an older, slender man named John Dempster. She introduced him, though we were already acquainted. While my legal focus had shifted to civil matters, I had previously handled criminal defense cases, collaborating with Detective Dempster. I held him in high regard and felt we had a good rapport. "Hi, Tim. I'm sorry for what occurred. Do you recognize the person you struck?" "My wife's boss, Simon Green." "Do you have any details about his residence?" "We have his belongings, sports gear, and credit card, but no ID." "I don't know much about him, John. Last I heard, he was married with kids in school, maybe a year ago." "Was there any indication of a romantic involvement between him and your wife?" "Not until today." "Could you recount the events leading up to the incident?" I recounted everything from my decision to go for a stress-relieving run to the moment I dialed emergency, leaving no detail out. "I had no motive for this." "Did you recognize Green when you were outside?" "No. It wasn't until he got out of bed that I realized who he was." "You struck him on the rear." "Yeah, I didn't intend to cause serious damage, but I wanted him away from my wife, no matter her wishes." "But then you strike him again. Why?" "As I mentioned, he threatened to take the baton and attack me with it. Then he charged at me with a roar." "Roared?" "Yeah, I guess he was trying to intimidate me. It worked. I aimed lower, not at his forehead. He must have ducked or lowered his head." "All right, your wife isn't implicated. We're testing her for medications. Once she's lucid, she should corroborate your account. You know, John, this phone belonged to Green. He likely recorded the encounter. The struggle might be captured on video. Why is it here? I used it to call emergency, then left it open. When I went outside, Dempster had a crime scene tech answer it. I inquired about Alice's fate. Not certain. Let's check. With Sergeant Haddon, we entered the living room where Alice sat with an officer and a medic. Dempster asked the medic, "What's up with Mrs. Jenkins? We're taking her to the county hospital for precaution, as she seems in shock. Vital signs are stable." I gazed at Alice, and in that instant our eyes met. A tear trickled down her right cheek. "I'm so sorry, Timmy," she murmured. Then she appeared to drift back into a trance. "Alice? Alice." I felt a twinge of frustration as she disconnected once more, remaining unresponsive. A short while later, she was transported by ambulance. I changed into clothes from the basement and trailed behind in our car. The police were inside the house, assuring me they would secure it or leave someone behind. I phoned Alice's parents, who resided in a neighboring state about 2 hours away, giving them a brief overview and promising to update them from the hospital. Alice and I tied the knot when she was fresh out of college at 21, while I was still a year away from graduating law school. She swiftly secured a position at Simon Green's insurance firm, where she steadily climbed the ranks from clerk to administrative assistant in his department, which dealt with housing and automobiles. I accompanied her to company gatherings and never observed any hint of impropriety between them. It marked my first encounter with the Green family. She had been with the company for over 6 years now, and I believed our marriage was solid until today. While I harbored little doubt that any interaction between them had been consensual, unless he somehow dazed her, this incident would likely spell the end of our marriage. Given the circumstances, I struggled to comprehend how he could have dazed her. There simply hadn't been enough time. I assumed she was awaiting him, likely unclothed, and she had left the back door ajar. I pondered how frequently this occurred. I adored Alice. She possessed beauty, cheerfulness, and kindness. Our lovemaking life was fulfilling, even amidst busy schedules, particularly on weekends. With my shift away from criminal trials, my workload became more predictable. I couldn't comprehend what I had witnessed. While Green was physically larger, today's events suggested otherwise, at least in crucial aspects. Yet, I only caught a glimpse. Who can say for sure? At the hospital, Simon Green's wife was in the ER. Though I recognized her, she seemed oblivious to me. I left things as they were and inquired about Alice. Granted permission, I returned to her room, where she slept. I gazed at her, feeling lost. I struggled to fathom her actions and their impact on us. I felt a profound need to grasp the events before making tough decisions. A female doctor in a white robe entered the room. "I'm Dr. Moore. Are you her husband?" I nodded. "What's her condition?" "She experienced mental trauma resulting in a shock-induced loss of consciousness. Once she wakes, she's likely to regain normalcy. When might that be?" "Possibly 3 to 4 hours, depending on the dosage. Thank you. I'll stay here." As she prepared to depart, I halted her. "What about Simon Green? How is he? Any relation?" "No, just an acquaintance. Unfortunately, he's in a medically induced coma due to a severe head injury." With that, she left. I mulled over Green's fate, initially believing I had caused his demise, but now uncertain. I phoned Alice's parents and relayed what I had learned. They contemplated visiting, but I dissuaded them, explaining that Alice and I needed to address the situation, likely involving her affair with her boss. Joni Carson, Alice's mother, expressed concern, noting Alice's recent change in demeanor. She implored me to give Alice a chance to explain. "I'll do that, I promise, though it doesn't seem to help much. We'll just have to wait and see." Seeking out Mrs. Green, I located her in the ICU waiting area. "Hello? Mrs. Green?" "Yes. Do you have something to say?" "No, ma'am. I'm Tim Jenkins. My wife Alice works at your husband's company." It appeared they were acquainted. She was tall, slender, with brown hair in her early 30s. "Acquainted?" "Yes. They were discovered together, unclothed, in my bedroom this morning, engaged in such closeness." "Ah, you're the one who struck him?" "Yes. Apologies." "Well, not really." "Okay," she continued. "Simon has been acting oddly lately. He's neglected his usual activities, citing work. I suspect he was preoccupied with your wife. While I can't confirm until now, they seem to have established a routine." "What did the doctors say about his condition?" "They were non-committal. Surgery may be on the horizon. Well, best of luck to you. Will you be taking your children?" "They're with my parents. They're aware he's in the hospital. Nothing out of the ordinary anymore." I stepped outside to catch some fresh air, hoping to clear my mind a bit. I resolved to withhold any decisions until I heard from Alice. After an hour, I returned indoors to find Alice still in the same area of the emergency room, concealed behind a curtain. Upon entering, she stirred but remained asleep. Taking a seat, I drifted off momentarily. I awoke to her stirring again, emitting faint moans. Her eyes fluttered open briefly before closing once more, accompanied by more moans. I rushed to summon help, spotting Dr. Moore at the nurse's station and signaling to her. She swiftly approached, observing Alice's condition. It appears she's awakening, though I'm unsure if my presence is warranted. Just then, Alice lost consciousness again. Please wait here. Dr. Moore entered the enclosure, and I could only hear their exchange from outside. How are you feeling, Alice? Can you speak? Alice responded weakly. God, I'm sorry. Alice, we need you fully conscious. You must acknowledge the situation and move forward. Detachment can't persist. We'll discharge you this afternoon, perhaps in 2 hours. Where's Tim? He was here earlier, but thought you might respond better if he stepped out. Though he's nearby. I wonder how long this will last. I messed up badly. And Simon? How is he? Tim hit him. We're unsure of his condition. He might require surgery. Damn. I warned him against taking risks. It was a gamble he lost. Maybe I will too. Perhaps you should talk to Tim. I can find him, or it can wait until we're home. I drew back the curtain and entered. Alice, I'll take you home soon, hopefully, okay? Thank you. I'm really sorry. We'll talk. Turning to Dr. Moore, I inquired, when can we leave? Right away. I'll handle the paperwork and provide medical attire. With that, she departed. Alice murmured, I'm sorry, Timmy, sorry, it's not a big deal. You have to understand. We'll discuss when we're home. As Dr. Moore presented her with a medical form, I stepped out while she changed. She seemed to interpret my departure as a rejection, and in a way, it was. I had no inclination to witness her undressed, perhaps ever again. They wheeled her out in a wheelchair. As I pulled the car up to the exit, she rose and entered the vehicle. We shared no words during the 10-minute drive. Though tears streamed down her face, she remained silent. Upon arriving home, I unlocked the front door and we stepped into what used to be our joyful abode. No police were present, and downstairs was relatively tidy. Alice settled into the rocking chair in the living room. I'll quickly check upstairs. Be right back. I ascended the stairs to find chaos. Our bedroom bore the brunt, with a section of carpet removed where Green had fallen. The bed lay stripped to the mattress, drawers pulled but not fully shut. I resolved to tidy up later. Other rooms appeared undisturbed except for the bathroom where fingerprint powder lingered. The prospect of conversing with Alice didn't appeal to me. I phoned her parents, informing them of her return. They breathed a sigh of relief but inquired about visiting. Uncertain, I clenched my teeth and descended the stairs. Would you like anything? Coffee? Water? Alice met my gaze but declined. Sitting opposite her on the sofa, we remained about 6 feet apart, silently facing each other. What happened, Alice? I thought everything was okay. It's complicated, Timmy. I've been working for Simon all these years. I've always respected him. No, it's more than that. Sometimes he made flirtatious remarks about my appearance. He started getting more touchy, placing his hand on my arm or shoulder. It caught me off guard. Then he asked me out to lunch, just the two of us. But didn't you find it odd, his sudden change in behavior? Didn't it strike you as strange? Maybe a little. She looked down. I was flattered, and he's attractive. I found myself intrigued. It took me a while to acknowledge it. So, you realized he was trying to seduce you? And what did you decide? I wanted to see where it would lead. She buried her face in her hands before looking up again. And then? At that point, I knew we were in trouble. It wasn't a case of being tricked or dazed. I wanted it. We went to dinner. I asked him why he was pursuing me now after all this time. He said he'd always desired me but suppressed it. Those were his words, Tim. Why? What's wrong with me that you were open to him? You're fine, Timmy. He claimed he wanted me more than you, that I was routine to you but exciting and new to him. Just the thought of it turned me on. Why didn't you talk to me about this? What could I have said? I'm considering cheating for some excitement. It never crossed my mind. How many times did you two have lovemaking, Alice? Not once. Today was supposed to be the first and only time. But then you showed up. I was terrified when I saw you. The look on your face after you dealt with him. It wasn't anger or hatred. It was the same as always. A quick glance, then you struck him with the baton. I figured the cops should have spoken to her first. Screw them. I had no choice. He charged at me. I saw it, but it happened so fast and ended so abruptly. Alice, I don't buy that this was the first time I caught him sneaking in through the back door. It wasn't locked, and it didn't take me long to get inside and upstairs. But there you both were, undressed. He was inches away from having lovemaking with you. You wanted it too, so I think this isn't your first rodeo. No, Tim. Simon and I kissed in his car 2 days ago. We flirted, but I stopped him from going further. I suggested he could come over after you left for work. It all seems so improbable. Think about it. If you saw what I saw, what would you believe? You have to trust me, or maybe not. I just don't know how to make you believe me. And now, I'll never be able to trust what you say. What should I do, Tim? I love you. I don't like Simon. He made me want him. How? He's forceful. He says what he wants. He wanted me. And apparently, you wanted him too, Alice. I need time to process all this. If I acted on my feelings now, we'd be headed for divorce. I can't erase what I saw. Okay, but please remember I love you. I'm so sorry you're hurting. She said it through tears. I turned and left, heading upstairs to our home office. I began examining the contents of Green's phone. Alice's phone had received numerous calls for the past 2 months, all in the evenings. No need to call during work hours. There were also texts discussing lunch. They seemed to dine together about twice a week for 5 weeks. Since Alice worked from home 3 days a week, this meant she had lunch with Green every day she went into the office. I decided to watch the video. It all began when he followed Alice upstairs, her in a short robe. She stepped into the bedroom and promptly flung him onto the floor. The video momentarily flickered as he positioned the phone on the dresser, focusing it towards the bed. You look stunning, Alice. Just as I always envisioned, he remarked. Thank you, Cy, she replied, seated on the bed. He shed his shorts and shirt eagerly. I need you right now, he asserted forcefully. Alice reclined on her back, inviting him forward. All right, let's do this. I want it too, she encouraged. He leaped onto the bed, and that's when I burst through the door and struck him. The audio on the video captured a resounding slap followed by his cry. I watched until I grabbed the phone to dial emergency. After viewing the video, I couldn't be certain if Alice was truthful about it being their first encounter. Perhaps. But undoubtedly she anticipated being engaged physically with Green. Maybe it would indeed be a one-time occurrence, as she claimed. Yet, I harbored doubts. After all, he was her boss. I returned to the living room and informed Alice that I needed to return to work to wrap up things at the office. By then, it was already past 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I jogged back, feeling less concerned about Alice's feelings and more consumed by anger. I halted my tasks to research divorce laws. In our state, infidelity was grounds for divorce, although it was rarely invoked. It could be pursued after 6 months of separation with a signed separation and property agreement. However, if one party refused to sign, the process could drag on, possibly for 18 months. Tim wasn't certain about divorcing Alice, but he was definite about seeking separation. He drafted an agreement outlining their separation terms. They would live apart, manage their finances separately, with each responsible for their own expenses. They agreed to refrain from any carnal relations between them, and notably pledged not to engage in carnal activity with others. Violation of this clause would grant the other party the freedom to proceed with divorce swiftly. He printed 3 copies and walked home. Alice was cooking dinner, a simple meal of spaghetti with meat sauce and salad. She wore a tracksuit, no makeup, and looked at him shyly, barefoot. It smells great, he remarked. Thanks. Need any help? She offered. I've got it covered. But if you want carrots in the salad, they're in the fridge. Tim chopped some carrots and added them to the bowl. They ate quietly, accompanied by red wine. Afterward, they washed the dishes together. Let's talk in the living room, Tim suggested, noticing Alice's apprehension. They moved to the living room, where Alice spoke softly. Tim, I want to reiterate how sorry I am. I'm trying to comprehend my mistakes. I've decided to seek professional help. Everything's okay, but I believe we need to separate. I'll find an apartment nearby. You can stay here. I don't feel comfortable staying here. Are you certain now? I feel so guilty. Do you want a divorce? Are we parting ways? This seems like a step in that direction. However, I haven't made a final decision. I just felt the need for some space to think. That's why I drafted a separation agreement. I handed it to Alice, who read it through with tears streaming down her face. Silent tears. I've already signed it, she said, looking up at me. Can we wait a few days before finalizing this so I can arrange for my mom to come here? You? Well, I can wait a bit. Let's agree on it. Why don't you take some time and let me know? Tim, I'm serious about what I said. I'm seeking counseling. Perhaps you could join if the therapist suggests it. Maybe. I still love you, Alice, but I'm confused and incredibly angry. It feels like I'll never be the same. Me too, but you did it. The person I thought you were, you're not. You got caught, but you're still the same person. You're just not who I thought you were, not the woman I loved. With that, she burst into tears, and I made no move to console her. The woman I loved would never do this. You're not her. Maybe you're similar, maybe not. I feel like our entire life together has been a lie. The only question is, how much of a lie? I headed upstairs, gathered my essentials from the master bedroom, enough to last the next day, and relocated to the guest room. The following day was a work day, and I barely slept. Rising early, I dressed and headed to work, stepping out around 9 a.m. to grab a McMuffin. Surprisingly, I managed to focus on work, sending out several emails and jotting down notes in the judge's office. Once engrossed, Alice slipped from my mind momentarily, perhaps indicating how I might need to navigate our separation. During lunch, I researched apartment rentals and scheduled a viewing for the following morning Friday at a place just 2 blocks from work. The day passed swiftly, serving as somewhat of an escape mechanism upon reflection. Around 5:30 p.m., I secured a 3-bedroom house on lease for 2 months. Though it had been our home for 4 years, it no longer felt like mine. Exiting the treadmill, I entered through the sliding back door, mirroring the previous day's routine. Alice was cooking fish stew, filling the kitchen with its inviting aroma. She was an excellent cook. I greeted her upon entering, and she looked at me. I made fish stew, I announced. It smells delicious. Thank you. I'll change now. As we dined on the stew, Alice mentioned, My mother will arrive on Saturday. Have you found a place for yourself? I might check out the apartment tomorrow, I replied. We could sign the papers tomorrow evening. I won't be here on Saturday anyway. It doesn't have to be like this, Tim, she insisted. I promise you it won't happen again, I said earnestly. I promise. Promises can easily be broken, she countered, her gaze steady, devoid of tears. You're letting your hurt feelings cloud your judgment. What's the wise course here? Ignore your betrayal? It won't happen again. You could try. But don't brush it under the rug. Forgive. I expressed my apology. Whether forgiveness is possible remains uncertain to me. However, I am certain that I will never forget what occurred, particularly what I witnessed on the video. If you'd like, I can email you a copy. God, Tim, she began to sob. I didn't intend to be harsh. I only wanted you to understand what I saw. Perhaps one day you'll forgive me for intruding. With that, she rushed away, ascending the stairs. I tidied everything up and secured a studio apartment with a lovely view of the running track and a small park. Situated midway between my workplace and our former home, it lacked furnishings. I arranged for a double bed, sofas, and armchairs to be delivered, albeit the expenses were burdensome yet necessary. Contemplating Alice's future employment prospects, I realized I might need to increase financial support if her job situation changed. During lunch, my thoughts meandered through various topics, ultimately leading me to conclude that a reconciliation with Alice was highly improbable. I recalled Michelle Davis, a friend from our workplace with whom I attended college and was involved before I met Alice. Though I chose Alice over her, and she in turn chose a fraternity member over me, we remained in touch as friends. I had perceived Michelle as somewhat fickle, which was reinforced by her brief fling with the fraternity guy. She ended the relationship as swiftly as it began. Michelle pursued law school alongside me and eventually married a fellow student, leading what appeared to be a stable life with a young son and a seemingly secure marriage. This illustrates my skill in understanding people. I dialed her number. Shelley, it's Tim. Damn, Tim, what's up? I heard you confronted Green. Not my doing. Self-defense. Tim, I'm free for lunch. Agreed. It was just a couple of hours away. At the restaurant, we hugged, settled in, and placed our orders. So spill it, she said. I confided in her, recognizing her as someone I still trusted. After recounting my tale, she revealed, I've heard chatter about Simon Green. Rumors suggest he's spiraling and might be headed for divorce. There's talk that Alice is involved with him. I found that hard to believe. What else did you hear? What did you witness? Casual lunches, office encounters. The rest was just speculation. He's changing, she said. Green, I mean. Seems like he's always on the hunt now. The office gossip is all about it. So Alice isn't the only one he's after? Maybe not, but she seems like a top target. They're together every day. No offense, but why didn't you tell me? I thought about it, but I figured she wouldn't make a move. And reaching out to you could stir up trouble. What's your plan? I've rented a place and drafted a separation agreement, 6 months, but I'm unsure. Did you talk to her at least? What's the point? She's already apologized and promised not to repeat it. So what? It's a tough situation. Yeah. How's things with you, Big Bill and Little Will? Little Will's doing great. He's 3 now, full of energy, starting preschool soon. And Tim, you don't have to listen to my issues. Yours are heavier. I could use a break. I'll help if I can, though. Is something up? Nothing major. Bill's away a lot for work. When he's back, he's distant, not like before. Hearing about Alice makes me think. I've decided to take action. Shelley, what do you think? She's out. She'll be back soon. Look, Tess, Alice is really confused about everything. Have you made any decisions? I just wanted to talk to Alice. Tess, where'd she go? Tess seemed a bit flustered. She's with a friend. Tess, you're not fooling anyone. Who's the friend? Did she stay here or somewhere else? Tim, she wasn't doing well. A friend came by and they went out to eat. Tess, was that dinner last night? You can't keep this from me. I noticed she was blocking the kitchen door on purpose. I headed towards the front door, and a new Mustang pulled up, driven by a blonde guy. He got out, circled the car, and opened the passenger door for Alice, who looked ready for a date. I rushed over. Hey, Alice, came to see you. She spun around, shocked. The guy appeared uneasy and concerned. Timmy, this is James from work. He drove me last night. I remained composed, but there was an edge to my voice that seemed to unsettle them both. James started to retreat. Look, man, I don't want any trouble. I was just trying to help. Cut the act. You got what you wanted. Stick around and you'll get more than you bargained for. He was my height and younger, and I noticed him stand taller. Clearly upset, Alice yelled, Stop! Just stop! James, it's time for you to go, I said. Sure thing, Alice, he replied with emphasis on you. He chuckled, quickly got back in his car and drove off. I looked at Alice. You didn't even last a week without breaking the agreement about no lovemaking. I'll bring this up when the papers are ready for you to be served. Tim, I'm sorry. I was vulnerable and knew we were broken up. But I do love you, even if it doesn't seem like it. You just needed some excitement, didn't you? What happened to you? We don't need to talk anymore. Get a lawyer. I turned and walked away, taking the path around the back to go home. It was a straightforward decision, though I was taken aback. We'd been together a long time without any of this. She was attractive, and men probably noticed her often. I wondered why she'd started giving in to them now, heading back to my room. I decided it might always remain a mystery. Or maybe I'd ask her. Mom. I managed to catch Tess alone about a week after my last visit. I'd slipped into the house when Alice was likely at work and knocked on the patio door. Tess let me in. Why are you here, Tim? I wanted to understand what happened, if possible. We were doing great, and then she changed. Any idea why? Perhaps she struggled with self-esteem. Growing up, she wasn't seen as attractive by boys. Throughout high school, she was flat-chested and thin. Her 2 friends developed faster, becoming popular cheerleaders. Alice lagged behind in popularity and drifted from them. But at 17, she changed, filled out in all the right places, and her acne cleared up. Suddenly, boys noticed her. She went to prom with a football player, lost her pureness at 18. And that summer was wild, going out with friends and boyfriends. I worried about pregnancy, but she used birth control. As far as I know, she stayed healthy, I explained. However, in college when we met, she didn't seem overly eager carnally. She seemed normal, but was more experienced than me. She was clear about her likes and desires. Since we started dating, she's been faithful. Tess paused, then asked, You were discussing having children? Yes, we planned to start a family, but that's over now. Maybe she feared that getting pregnant would make her less appealing to men. I think she reached out to her boss because he was pursuing her and she needed reassurance. That's my best guess. But what about the guy with the Mustang? Same reason. A young guy with a fancy car made her feel desired, but she already knew that she might not end up married or have children. For me, yes. Don't know. Maybe she was just craving excitement. How long will you be around? Not too long. Take care, Tess. I departed. The divorce proceeded smoothly. Alice moved out of our rented place to another apartment across town, closer to her job. We lost touch. After the divorce hearing, as we were leaving the courthouse, Alice approached me. Let's grab lunch, Tim, she said. Actually, I'll treat. There's something I need to say. All right. We chose Red Lobster. I had an appetizer, she had soup, and she looked at me after we ordered. Tim, I messed up. I've seen a therapist. She thinks I was scared of having kids, but I'm not sure. Maybe I'm just not cut out for commitment. I was really attracted to Simon. Sorry, I might never understand myself. What happened to him anyway? I never heard anything after that. He's back to working part-time, using a cane and his right hand sparingly, and his wife left him. Good for her. That seems harsh. You really messed up his life, Tim. You and he messed up mine too. But maybe not as badly as you messed up your own life. By the way, how are you? I miss our life together. Now I can be as carnally active as I want with most guys I meet, and I really enjoy it. It gets me excited and eager. I feel the need to act on it. I'm not sure why this urge has returned. Simon reminded me of the guy from prom who took my pureness. Maybe I wanted to relive those youthful times. And now you can enjoy them. You can seek pleasure in lovemaking. That's harsh, but she chuckled. It wasn't meant to be funny, but I saw the irony and laughed along. She added, "A new guy always gets me going." Pausing, she continued, "But honestly, I miss our family life. I haven't found anyone better in bed than you. Maybe one was just as good and he's bigger. But we knew each other so well. You always satisfied me completely. I was foolish." I'll admit, our talk about her promiscuous behavior had me on edge. I didn't hide it well, and she noticed. "You still find me attractive, Tim. I'm always here for you," she started singing. "Just call my name and you know wherever I am, I'll come running to see you again." She smiled at me. Oh, Alice. I was torn. Alice was the most attractive woman to me, more than anyone else I'd ever known. Our waitress brought our food. Alice quickly put down $30. "We need to go now." I stood, and both Alice and Gwen, our waitress, glanced at my lap. Alice blushed, and waitress, whose name tag read Gwen, blushed too, briefly looking puzzled before breaking into a smile. "I see you two need some time alone," Gwen said, looking at me. "Come back later, big guy. I get off at 6. Alice grabbed my hand, shooting Gwen an annoyed look, and pulled me outside. Her apartment was a short walk away. We entered the building, took the elevator up, and as soon as the doors closed, Alice kissed me passionately. Pressing me against the wall, she ran her hands over me. "This is going to be amazing, Tim." "Okay." I was out of breath. The elevator door opened to reveal 2 women. As Alice and I stepped out, they looked shocked. We hurried past. One greeted, "Hey, Alice." Alice didn't respond. She ushered me into her apartment, and I nearly tripped over an end table. We quickly undressed. Stepping back, she scanned me, and I did the same. She licked her lips. I led her to the bedroom and laid her on the bed. "Take me now," she urged. She flipped me onto my back. "I told you I'd pin you down," she said. Our encounter was brief but intense. We both felt satisfied. Afterward, we lay together, catching our breath. Maybe I should have considered how strange it was to climax on the day of our divorce, but that's for later, Alice mused. She sat up, looking at me. "That was the best lovemaking we've ever had. The best I've ever had. I should have left you sooner." I felt aroused again. We had passionate, prolonged lovemaking. She reached climax multiple times, just like the best moments in our marriage. Then I reached my peak, which was as intense and satisfying as the first time. This time I rolled away from her. I thought staying would lead to more activity, potentially damaging my health. The divorce was finalized that morning, and Alice and I continued our activities until late at night. We had a light meal. I suggested returning to Red Lobster, but she declined, saying we had soup from the fridge. We didn't bother dressing to eat. After finishing her cake, she looked at me. "Should we talk or keep going?" Without hesitation, I stood, took her hand, and said, "Let's go." We repeated this several times, all of which were incredible. Some encounters were slow, some intense. We both knew each other's triggers. Sometimes it felt like a battle to see who could make the other give in. Neither of us won, but it was thrilling. The next morning, we were engaged physically again before she made breakfast. As we ate, I felt we needed to discuss our situation. "Alice, I hope we can maintain this," I said. "Timmy, I realize now that marrying was a mistake," she responded. "I tried to keep my promise to be faithful, but I've learned I can't. That doesn't mean I want you out of my life. I wasn't joking when I referenced the James Taylor song. But there will come a time, Alice, when I'll want to settle down and have kids. Maybe that's what led you to other men. So I enjoy being with you physically. You're the best, and you'll likely remain the best I've ever had. I believe we could continue this until one of us decides to stop, she concurred. Over the weekend, we stayed in bed, taking short breaks only to eat, shower, and use the bathroom. On Saturday afternoon, there was a knock at the door. Alice donned her robe and answered it. It was the woman from the elevator, Maisie. She was older, but looked good. "Alice, I haven't seen you in a while. I just wanted to make sure you're okay," Maisie said. "I'm doing quite well, Maisie," Alice responded. "Very well, actually." She smiled at me, and Maisie glanced over too. "I get it. Enjoy yourself. You're fortunate, Alice. I won't worry anymore. Thanks." Alice closed the door softly and giggled. "You really gave her a good view. Maybe you should have invited her in for coffee. She might have liked it with cream," I teased. "I can't let that happen. Too much cholesterol," she retorted, pulling off my shorts. On Monday, we both returned to work without resolving anything. All day I mulled over our situation. I'd never consider a lasting relationship with Alice. We couldn't form a real partnership. However, as long as our chemistry was strong, I was willing to continue. Until I found someone I wanted to marry and start a family with, I'd tread carefully. Alice had taught me a tough lesson. Still, I desired a family and kids. I was cautious, unlike Alice, who had multiple partners, including 3 others besides me. We weren't committed, and it didn't bother me. Actually, the idea of her being promiscuous was somewhat exciting. I made sure to get tested regularly for STDs, and all results were negative. By the way, I ran into Maisie after leaving Alice's one day. We had a brief encounter, I confessed. Maisie gave me a knowing look. "Hey there, I remember you, and you certainly left an impression," Maisie remarked. "I recall you too, Maisie. Alice mentioned you're divorced," I said. "Yes, it's been a year and a half. Being single at my age isn't easy. You look fantastic, no matter your age. Care to invite me in? I'm certain about it." "You're Tim, aren't you?" Maisie inquired. "That's me," I confirmed. We headed up to the 4th floor, where Maisie's apartment was directly across from Alice's. As we reached Maisie's door, Alice emerged from hers, spotting us and bursting into laughter. "You're quite the catch, Tim. I never would have guessed when we were married," Alice commented, glancing at Maisie. "Enjoy yourself, Maisie. Tim's quite the catch." With that, she sauntered off gracefully. Though Maisie showed interest in both Alice and me, she first led me to a well-furnished bedroom. Maisie was 40 with a college-age son and a daughter working downtown. She was skilled in closeness, and I genuinely enjoyed our time together. I departed the next morning, promising to stay in touch. A promise I kept. I truly enjoyed my time with her. Curiosity piqued about the other women on the 4th floor, but I never got around to meeting them. One day, while passing the courthouse, a woman approached me and said, "We've never met before." She seemed puzzled. I recognized her, Gwen, the waitress from Red Lobster. "You're Gwen, right? You served us when we dined there." "Ah, now I remember. It's odd I forgot, but I didn't really see your face then." "I'm Tim. Are you still at the restaurant?" "Part-time. I also do some modeling." Gwen was an attractive blonde with a slender figure, well-defined hips, and blue eyes. "I recall you mentioned meeting up at 6, but Alice and I spent the whole weekend together," I said. Are you two back together?" she inquired. "No, Well, that day we met you was right after our divorce was finalized in court. It seemed to reinvigorate us, as you observed," I clarified. "That's odd. Are you two still seeing each other?" Gwen asked. "We're dating. We're compatible in some ways, but not in others," I replied. She smiled. "Maybe you should take me out sometime. I'm off today." "I like the sound of that. How about dinner at my place tonight? I'll cook," I suggested. "Sounds great. I'm looking forward to it, Tim." That evening, she arrived around 6:30, looking stunning in a chic evening dress and sandals. I prepared fried chicken and fried rice for dinner, and we had a good conversation. She was 25, juggling work as a model for various clothing magazines and a waitress. While she wasn't married, she had ended a long-term relationship about 10 months prior. At that time, I was 34, working at a successful law firm and living independently with a good car. I had separate relationships with Alice, Maisie, and a woman from the courthouse, but I was ready for commitment and found Gwen appealing. I decided to pursue a relationship with her and see where it went. On our first night out, we agreed I'd drive her home, and she kissed me at her doorstep. While I was thrilled, she didn't immediately take things to the bedroom. As our relationship progressed, I found myself falling for her. She was both attractive and intelligent, and I believed she felt the same way about me. By our third date, we became engaged physically. It was a beautiful experience. I felt a connection, and she seemed to appreciate it. That night, I decided to end things with the other women I'd been seeing. A few weeks later, after a particularly intense, engaged physically encounter with Gwen, she revealed she enjoys rougher experiences at times, something we both liked, as do many others, I assume. Gwen, I've shared about my past marriage and its issues, but now I think I'm in love with you, I admitted. I've stopped seeing other women. I'm glad to hear that. Since meeting you, you're the only guy I've dated. I haven't even kissed anyone else. I really love you, Tim, but I'm concerned about your trust issues regarding fidelity. Will you always have doubts about me? If I commit to being only with you, I'll stick to it, she asked. I'd be dishonest if I said I wasn't concerned, but if you assure me I'll do everything I can to address my trust issues. All right, it's a deal. I'll remain faithful and you will too. That works, I agreed. 2 weeks later, I proposed, and we tied the knot 3 months after that. While her parents lived in Chicago, we chose to have the ceremony locally. It was modest. I invited Alice and Maisie. I introduced Gwen to Alice shortly after proposing. Alice was cordial, but I could tell she felt a bit downcast. Our connection wasn't based on love, but I knew she'd miss our engaged physically moments. I would have felt the same way. Gwen and I chose the Bahamas for our honeymoon, which was fantastic. Afterward, we moved into my apartment and things went smoothly. We soon decided to start a family and were blessed with 2 children in 3 years, Thomas and Eileen. I became a partner at my firm and purchased a house in a nearby suburb. I stayed in touch with Alice, not the one with whom I'd been engaged physically. She wed a coworker named Larry Gibson a year after Gwen and I tied the knot. He was successful, and she had 2 sons, Lawrence and Raymond. They relocated near Gwen and me, and the 4 of us often crossed paths. Our kids even attended the same preschool. Gwen and Alice became friends, though Larry seemed wary of me. I sensed he doubted my intentions around Alice, and he was correct. There was still an attraction between us. Gwen recognized it too, but trusted me completely, even growing to trust Alice not to encroach on our relationship. However, Larry, who sometimes noticed the chemistry between Alice and me, remained uneasy. Despite this, Larry and I shared interests, particularly baseball. We played together on a men's team in an old-timers league and excelled. We also had season tickets for MLB games, both being avid fans. Occasionally, Larry and I attended games together. One day, while waiting to exit the garage at Gems Park, I decided to have a candid conversation with him about my past relationship with Alice. After the game, I approached him. Larry, I want to be clear. I'll never have a physical relationship with Alice again. We're both married now. I can see this bothers you, I admitted. Tim, that's a direct way to put it. We could be good friends if you trusted Alice and me, but it's clear you two still have lingering feelings, he replied frankly. There's a history, sure. We were compatible. But I promise you, and I'm sure Alice has said the same, we need to put this behind us, I insisted. Tim, whenever I see you two together, like at the club dance last month, it seems like you shared some incredible moments, he said. Sometimes I wonder who she's thinking of when we're engaged physically. Me, you, or some movie star, he added. Do you ever think of her when you're with Gwen? He asked. Not usually, but I won't deny she crosses my mind. We had some great times, maybe even better ones than I've had since, I confessed. That's what truly concerns me, Larry. I see your point. I hadn't thought of it that way. Thanks for sharing, he responded, making our conversation easier for all involved. However, I wasn't entirely truthful. The closeness I had with Alice post-divorce was unparalleled. It still crosses my mind, especially when I see her, and I suspect she feels the same. Maybe if we're both in our 80s and circumstances change, we'll see if we can rekindle that passion.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
Gary woke up from a dream, though as usual, the details were lost to him. He just knew he had dreamt something, but the specifics were out of reach, like sand slipping through his fingers. It was always like that. He never could recall his dreams. He lay there for a few moments, then rolled out of bed, heading for the bathroom. After using the toilet, he felt good, really good, in fact. Another day where he didn't need his medication. That thought made him chuckle. Opening the medicine cabinet, he looked at the familiar bottles. The pills lined up neatly, waiting for him. But he wasn't like the others he saw at the doctor's office. The people with the vacant stares and the sad, hollow eyes. He didn't hear voices, and he wasn't depressed. No, not like them. His next appointment was a few days away, so he knew he'd have to start taking the pills again soon. But not today. Today, he was in control. After showering and shaving, he stood in front of the mirror, studying his reflection. He asked himself, what face do I want to wear today? He practiced a few expressions, trying on different versions of himself, like a man choosing the right suit for an occasion. Finally, he settled on a face he liked, the perfect blend of confidence and calm. He got dressed and made his way to the kitchen, where he fixed himself a simple bowl of cereal. As he ate, his mind drifted to where he would go today. The face he chose always helped guide his plans. Today felt like a field trip kind of day, and the suburbs seemed like the perfect destination. They were peaceful this time of year, a nice place for some quiet contemplation. He placed the empty bowl in the sink, leaving the washing up for later. Right now, he had more important things to plan. He walked into the living room and grabbed his tool bag from beside the couch. Sitting down, he pulled out his map, unfolding it carefully. Small red dots were scattered across various locations, each one holding a memory for him. His eyes traced over the marks before landing on one spot, Sundale, a place he hadn't visited yet. A smile crept across his face as he folded the map and slid it back into the bag. Standing up, he walked over to the full-length mirror by the door. He stripped down to his shorts and admired his reflection. He flexed, appreciating the toned muscles, the strength that hid beneath his otherwise unassuming appearance. He was tougher than he looked, and he liked it that way. His mind flashed back to 2 days ago, at the martial arts studio. He'd been feeling just as good then, practicing kicks and body punches on the heavy bag. But then Ronald had come over, pushing him aside to take over the bag. "Excuse me, I was using that," Gary had said, keeping his voice polite. Ronald, a black belt, had sneered at him. "No belt? If you want a beating, just keep talking." Gary had grabbed Ronald's arm mid-punch, holding it in a firm grip. Ronald had glared at him, shaking his arm free. "Have you lost your mind, fool?" Gary didn't answer then. He didn't need to. He just smiled. Gary said again very politely, "I was using that bag. I would like to finish my workout." The instructor saw something was going on, so he walked over. He stood there a moment with his hands on his hips and asked, "What is going on, you two?" Without taking his eyes off Ronald, Gary said, "I was using the bag. He came over and pushed me out of the way. All I want to do is finish my workout and then go home. He can use it as much as he wants then." The instructor looked at Ronald and said, "That seems reasonable to me. Do you have a problem with that?" Ronald looked at the instructor and said, "He's a no belt. I am a black belt. He should give way to his superiors," as he pointed to Gary. The instructor raised his eyebrows in surprise. He looked at Ronald and said, "I have tried to teach you the reason for martial arts. It is not to bully people. It is for self-defense only and to help those who are not as strong as you. But I haven't been able to teach you that. Maybe it is time you learn your mouth can get you into big trouble." Ronald looked at the instructor with a bit of surprise on his face. He didn't know what he was getting at. He thought the instructor was going to challenge him to a fight or something like that. While he was a black belt, he wasn't sure he could take the instructor and didn't want to find out. The instructor looked at Gary and said, "You up for this?" Gary just smiled and nodded his head once. Ronald looked from the instructor to Gary and back, then smiled in understanding. The instructor called all of the students and put them in a circle. He looked each one in the eye and said, "I don't teach martial arts so you can bully people. When you get the higher belts, I expect a certain level of mental and physical restraint. What we have here is a man who earned his black belt a while ago. While he has the necessary physical skills, he still hasn't learned the mental restraint that goes with those skills. I have tried to teach you to use your skills to help people, not hurt." However, Ronald thinks that because he has a black belt, everyone should bow to him, or at the very least, they should get out of his way. Tonight, a man refused to get out of his way. So there is going to be a demonstration tonight. Ronald thinks because Gary doesn't have a belt, he isn't worth respect. Gary believes even if he doesn't have a belt, he deserves respect. There is only one way to settle this. Gary and Ronald had taken opposite sides of the ring and stood waiting for the speech to end. Gary had calmed himself and had done all of the mental exercises he was taught. He was ready, and he was feeling good. Inside and out, he was calm. He knew the adrenaline would only help once the fight started. He looked at Ronald, who was bouncing on the balls of his feet. Gary smiled at him. He knew he was in complete control. The instructor stepped back to ring formed by the students. He looked at Gary and Ronald, then said, "Okay, go for it." Ronald immediately attacked. He threw punches and kicks. Gary blocked some of them, ducked some of them, but some of them found their mark. Gary thought to himself, "Tomorrow I'm going to hurt, but tonight the adrenaline keeps me from feeling it." The students were cheering and booing. They were also shouting advice to both fighters. Gary kept sliding his feet, keeping at least one foot in contact with the mat at all times. He kept just out of Ronald's reach. Ronald kept attacking and trying to move into strike range. After a few minutes, Ronald was breathing hard. He started missing more and more. He noticed his arms were getting heavy. He realized he was getting tired, and he had better end this soon. He renewed his attack and started throwing more punches and kicks. Gary watched all of this. This was going just the way he had planned. He knew Ronald couldn't keep up this level of attack much longer, then it would be his turn. He kept moving back, just at the edge of Ronald's reach. He kept blocking and dodging the strikes. Ronald was having a hard time breathing, and his arms were getting so heavy. He decided to grab Gary and give himself some breathing space. He grabbed Gary in a bear hug, pinning both arms to his side. Gary reared his head back and head-butted Ronald right in the nose. Ronald's nose immediately spurted blood. Ronald howled in pain and dropped Gary. The students grew quiet, looked at the instructor, expecting him to stop the fight. The instructor looked at them and said, "If you are getting mugged and get a bloody nose, what are you going to do? Are you going to say, 'Well, I have a bloody nose, we need to stop'? No, you keep on fighting. This is the same thing. You have to learn to fight through the pain." Once Ronald let go, Gary went on the attack. He started throwing punches and kicks. Unlike Ronald's attack, Gary's hit the mark more often than not. A few minutes later, Ronald's eye was starting to swell shut, and he had a fat lip. Just as the instructor was getting ready to stop the fight, Gary hit Ronald hard and knocked him down. The instructor went over to Ronald and looked at him. "You okay?" he said as he got on one knee. Ronald looked up at him and growled, "I'm fine. I want to finish this," and started to get to his feet. The instructor gently pushed him back on the mat and told him to lay there for now. Then he looked at the circle of students. Just because someone doesn't wear a certain color belt doesn't mean they aren't deserving of your respect. Gary here doesn't wear a colored belt, but I dare say he could beat several of you at the same time. Let this serve as a lesson. You need to have the mental maturity as well as the psychical skill to move up into the higher belts. Then he looked at Ronald and said, "I hope you learned a lesson tonight. If you have, then come back. If you haven't, find a new studio. I don't teach bullies." Gary stood in front of the mirror and saw the night as if it was happening again right in front of him. Just then a horn blared outside and shook him out of his revelry. Gary's eyes refocused on his image. He smiled and looked at the few bruises he had from the fight. "I may have a bruise or two, but Ronald will not be able to see out of that eye for at least 2 more days. He has a fat lip and lots more pain." As Gary talked to himself, he gave a little laugh. He shook his head, then redressed, grabbed his tool bag, went out the door and down the street and caught the bus. As he rode towards Sundale, he watched the sun come up and thought again what a beautiful day this was going to be. When he got to Sundale, he walked along and marveled at the clean sidewalks. The suburbs always had clean sidewalks. Where he lived, the sidewalks were almost black, they were so dirty. They had years of accumulated vomit, urine, spit, blood, and gum on them. These sidewalks were so bright he thought they might blind him. He liked the burbs. The nice neat houses with their neat lawns and gardens. Everything seemed perfect, except he knew what happened when the husbands were away. The 304s who lived in those neat houses cheated on their husbands every day. He walked on muttering to himself. When he got to the corner, he realized he was getting upset. He was shaking, and when he talked, spit flew out of his mouth. He felt good, and when he felt good, he was in control, but he was losing control. He stopped and got himself back under control. Once he had himself back under control, he walked on. He saw the school as soon as he came around the corner. He liked elementary schools. He liked watching the kids going into the school. They were just at the age where they were getting their first taste of independence. When they first got to kindergarten, the moms would drop them off and they would run into the school. The older kids weren't to the age where they knew everything yet. They could still be taught, and he loved teaching them. He was proud that he was the one who taught some of them about how the world works. He had watched kids before. He knew he had to keep moving. When he did that, no one paid any attention. If he looked like just another working stiff, he could hang out and watch the parents drop off the innocents without raising any suspicions. He moved on when school started. He walked around the neighborhood for some time. Finally, he came up to a park where there were several mothers with their children. He watched for a short while, then he caught sight of her. A perfect little girl. She had brown hair that came to just below her ears. He liked brown hair. She had on a cute pants and matching shirt set, and she had the cutest athletic shoes. They were brown-soled with pink tops. He watched her and her mother play for a long time. Finally, the mother called to her and they left the park. As they walked down the street to their home, the little girl would hold her mother's hand for a while. Then she would see something like a flower or a bug that caught her interest, and she would run off to investigate. Gary liked the little high laugh she had. He liked being around kids when they laughed. It made the world right. Gary walked at a distance, so the little girl and her mother had no idea he was following them. The little girl skipped and did little spins. Gary could tell she was young enough to not have any worries or cares. As Gary walked behind them, he swung his tool bag and whistled to himself. When the mother and little girl turned up a driveway, Gary kept walking past. He looked at the house. He said to himself, "Yep, just the kind of house I suspected." It was blue with white trim. There were low bushes lining the front of the house. There wasn't a sidewalk, just a driveway. He noticed the roses on the side of the house. He saw there was a fence around what appeared to be a backyard. He walked 2 houses down and turned up the driveway. They didn't have a garage, and there weren't any cars in the driveway. So, he walked up to the gate and let himself in the backyard. He hopped the fence heading for the little girl's house. He didn't want to hurry too much. He guessed the girl would take a nap before lunch, but before that she would have a snack. So he had time to kill before he paid his visit. As he jumped the second fence, he was greeted by a large dog. He had moved so quickly and quietly he had surprised the sleeping dog. As the dog saw Gary drop down to the lawn, he started barking and then charged Gary. Gary stood there and watched the dog charge him. He was in control, so he was calm. Just as the dog jumped for Gary's chest, he stepped out of the way. As the dog flew past, Gary grabbed his tail. He used the dog's momentum and swung the animal into the fence. The dog made a little yelp and went limp. Gary looked at the unconscious dog and jumped the fence into the little girl's yard. He stole across the yard and peeked into the window. He was looking into a kitchen area. The 304 was the only one he could see. So much the better. It will make the lesson that much easier, he thought to himself. He moved out of sight of the window and opened his tool bag. He pulled out the paper painter's overalls and the latex gloves. When he went on field trips, he always made sure he had the right tools. He slipped into the overalls and gloves. He watched CSI so he knew what the police would be looking for. He was sure not to step into the dirt, that way they wouldn't have footprints to make plaster casts of. He smiled to himself. He was in control. He grabbed his tool bag and moved up to the window again. He looked in and almost cried out. The 304 was kissing some guy in the kitchen. Here she was, getting ready to do some guy in the kitchen while her husband worked hard to make money. Gary sat there for a minute longer, feeling his rage growing. I'm really going to like giving this lesson, he thought to himself. He reached into his tool bag and got his lockpick. When he opened the door, he was sure the 304 and the man hadn't heard him. As he moved into the kitchen, he grabbed his sap from his tool bag. What he saw almost made him gag. The 304 was up against the counter with the guy leaning in and kissing her. At least they both had all of their clothes on. He wasn't sure he wouldn't have thrown up if they were naked. The 304 opened her eyes just in time to see him bring the sap down hard on the side of the guy's head. She screamed as the man gave a little grunt and slid to the floor. Gary dropped his bag and grabbed her by the throat with his left hand. He pushed her up against the cabinet and squeezed. She struggled and grabbed his hand, trying to pry his hand loose, but he was just too strong. He liked watching the faces of the 304s as they realized they were paying for their lifestyles. The 304's eyes bugged out. Her face turned a reddish purple, and she tried to gasp for breath. Gary kept up the pressure until she stopped struggling. He pulled his hat away, and she slid to the floor. Gary knew she wasn't dead yet, just out due to lack of oxygen. He put his sap back in his tool bag and pulled out his knife. He lovingly looked at the thin chrome blade. It was made for just this type of work. But before his knife could do its work, he needed some items. He looked around and found the drawer the 304 kept her dish towels in and pulled several out. Now, he was ready. He felt for the man's pulse on the side of his neck. Gary coved the man's neck with 2 of the towels. Then Gary slid the blade into the artery pulsing under his fingers, blood immediately squirting out. Gary smiled. This was a trick he learned a long time ago. When an artery is cut, blood gets everywhere unless you cover it up. The first time he did this, he was covered in blood. He had to take a shower before he could leave the house. Then he moved to the 304. Her breathing was shallow and rapid, so she was still alive, he observed. He repeated the process with the towel and knife. As he stuck the knife in her neck, her eyes flew open. Gary immediately sat on top of her to keep her from moving. He wasn't worried. It would only take a few minutes before she was out for good. After all movement stopped, Gary got up and washed the knife in the sink. Cleanliness is next to godliness, he said out loud to himself. Then he pulled off the coveralls and gloves. He put them in a plastic garbage bag he had pulled from his tool bag. He put a clean pair of gloves on. He had done this so many times it was second nature to him. He was sure he wouldn't leave anything behind that would lead to him. He looked at the pair on the floor. The blood had pooled around them in a large puddle, so he couldn't walk over to them and close their eyes. As he looked, he noticed the 304's face showed surprise and fear. He hoped the look would freeze on her face forever. He wanted people to know what happens to women who bang other men while their husbands are away. He walked through the living room toward the front door. As he walked through the room, he looked around at the furniture and pictures. A picture on the bookshelf caught his attention. He walked over to look at it. When he got close enough, he let out a little laugh and had a sheepish grin on his face. He noticed a man, woman, and little girl in the picture. The man and woman were standing on either side of the little girl. Gary saw the man and woman were the ones in the kitchen. Oops. I guess she was just having a little daytime fun with her husband, he said with a little laugh. Then getting serious, he said, but she was probably screwing every guy she could. That's what 304s do. He picked up the phone and dialed 911 and left it off the hook. He knew the police would send someone by to check out the call. He left the front door open a little bit. That way the police would get suspicious and look around. He wants them to find the people in the kitchen before the little girl did. As he walked toward the bus stop, he whistled a peppy little tune. He felt good about this field trip. The little girl would learn not to be a 304 like her mommy, and the 304 wouldn't be able to cheat on her husband anymore. When he got home, he grabbed his martial arts uniform and headed to the studio. He needed a good workout, and he had some classes to teach tonight. When he got to the studio, he started working out. After a field trip, he was at his best. Also, he had lots of extra energy to burn off. He looked around for Ronald. If he came in, Gary would give him lots of room. Gary wasn't interested in a fight. He was feeling good and didn't want anything to spoil the mood. When the studio closed, he went home. Now I have other appetites to satisfy, he said to himself as he took his shower. After his field trips, he liked to find his girlfriend, Candy, and spend the evening with her. She was the only one who could satisfy the feelings he had right now. As he was drying off after his shower, he looked at his medication again. He looked in the mirror and said, I feel good. I went on a field trip today. I have put the other face away and don't need to get another one. I'm going to see Candy, so I don't need those tonight. Maybe tomorrow. He went to his closet and found the best jeans and shirt he had and went out. He went to the spot Candy usually hung out, and it didn't take long before he spotted her getting out of a car. He went to her, and since he was her favorite, they went right to her room. As Gary lay there in the afterglow of one of the greatest days he had ever had, he thought, okay, this is the day. I'm going to ask her to marry me. As Candy lay on her side facing away from him, he asked her, don't you have to get back to work? When I'm with you, I can take the night off. Now go to sleep. I'm tired. I just want to help you with the rent and stuff like you said. I want to ask you something. Do you love me? Candy sighed and barely awake answered, of course I love you. Gary gathered up his courage and asked, then will you marry me? When Candy answered, her voice was just a whisper, but you could still hear the irritation in it. Yeah, whatever. Now would you just go to sleep? Gary's heart swelled. The woman he loved with all of his heart, and who loved him with all of her heart, was going to marry him. He lay in the semi-dark thinking of all the things that needed to be done. First, he had to get a ring. He knew a pawn shop he could get the ring from, so that was one thing done. As he was going over the details for their wedding, he drifted off to sleep. He awoke early as usual and left the room very quietly. He didn't want to wake Candy. She worked nights in customer service and needed her sleep. He went home and got his money. He looked at the medications again and decided he didn't need them. He wasn't hearing voices or seeing things, so he wasn't crazy. Anyway, the stuff made him tired, and he didn't like feeling that way. After the field trip and the night with Candy, he felt he was on top of the world. He went to the pawn shop and talked to the owner. The owner was very helpful, and they settled on a small diamond for a price he could afford. Afterward, he went to the studio and worked out a bit. Ronald showed up, but kept his distance. Gary was thankful for that. He didn't want trouble with Ronald tonight. He thought to himself, I'm going to have to do something about Ronald someday. Maybe a field trip. He only stayed about 2 hours and had someone else teach his class. He went home, took a shower, and went to look for Candy. When he couldn't find her, he found her friend Tiffany. Hey, where can I find Candy? Tiffany looked at him with a mixture of surprise and sadness. Sweetie, don't you know? Don't I know what? Gary said. Mr. Brown called for her today. No one has seen her since. You didn't hear this from me. Mr. Brown likes it rough, and I think he got too rough and killed her. But like I said, you didn't hear that from me. Understand? Gary stood there stunned. He couldn't believe what Tiffany had just said. His brain heard the words, but just couldn't process them. Hey, did you just hear what I said? I said you can't tell anyone what I just said. Tiffany looked at him with a worried expression on her face. Gary got control of himself. He stood there another minute and gathered his thoughts. Then he looked at Tiffany with a face devoid of emotion and said, I heard you. Don't worry, I won't tell anyone. Tiffany tried to light a cigarette, but her hands were shaking too much. Thanks. I know you felt something for Candy. I'm sorry to be the one to tell you. Gary knew what he had to do. This thought came as clear as when he got them for his field trips. This was the woman he loved. The woman who would have his children. They were going to move out of this area of the city. They would find somewhere nice. With his disability pay and the money she made from her customer service job, they could make it. He started walking home. He knew who Brown was. He was a dirtbag drug dealer. First thing he had to do was go home and put on the correct face. Then he had to find Chimes. Chimes was Lola's manager. He carried a Bell's keychain in his pockets, so he jingled all the time. Gary opened the door to his apartment. Whenever he walked in, he felt safe. This was his sanctuary. Whenever he was inside, he could be himself. He didn't need to put on a face. He never felt more in control than he did now. He looked in the mirror and decided on the face he was going to put on. He had a plan, and this face was just the right one. He grabbed his tool bag and walked out to the street where he thought he would find Chimes. He figured Chimes could lead him or show him where Brown was. He asked a few of Chimes' employees where he could be found. One girl told him she thought he was at the coffee shop down the street. He walked on the opposite side of the street from the coffee shop. The street lights had been knocked out by the drug dealers, so the whole street was in shadows. He melted into a doorway across from the coffee shop and looked in the big front window. He saw Chimes sitting with Brown in a booth near the back. Between the front door and Brown were two rough-looking thugs. Gary knew these must be Brown's bodyguards. He gripped his tool bag tightly and walked across the street. He opened the door and walked in. As soon as he cleared the door, he dropped his tool bag on a table. He continued to walk toward Chimes and Brown. As he got closer, he said in a loud tone, "Chimes, can you help me out? I'm a little short and need a job." The two bodyguards got up from the table and started to block his way. One pulled his gun out. Gary was ready for them. He had been practicing martial arts for 20 years. He just shut down the thought section of his brain and reacted. He grabbed the gun with his left hand and twisted it up. With his right elbow, he hit the guy under the chin. The thug stumbled back and fell. Gary brought his foot down hard on the second guy's knee. There was an audible crack as the leg broke. Gary grabbed the guy on the back of the head by the hair. As the guy started to fall, Gary brought his head down hard on the table. The thug fell unconscious and rolled onto the floor. The first guy had recovered and started to swing at Gary. Gary blocked the swing and brought his knee up to the thug's groin. The thug let out a little oof and fell to his knees. Gary kicked him on the side of the head. He fell over unconscious, still grabbing his groin. The whole fight had taken no more than 10 seconds. Brown started to pull his gun, but Chimes stopped him. "He's one of Lola's customers, and he does some courier work for me once in a while. So he's cool, just a bit nuts." Gary stood and looked at the two men and said, "Chimes, you got anything for me?" Brown looked at Gary and said, "You just walked through two of my best, and you did it without a gun." Gary gave a sheepish grin, looked at the two on the floor, then back at Brown and said, "Hey, I'm sorry. I didn't know they were yours. They just jumped up with a gun and I reacted. That's all right. If they couldn't protect me, what good are they? You said you were looking for a job? How about being my bodyguard?" Gary walked over to one of the thugs, picked up his gun, and shoved it in his belt. Then he walked toward his tool bag and said over his shoulder, "Let me get my bag first. Yes, I would like to work for you. And don't worry, I'll take care of you." Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
I met Agnes in the 9th grade, started dating her, and we were pretty much an established couple from the 10th grade on. We had no problems all the way through high school, and cliché of all clichés, we exchanged our cleanest the night of the senior prom. After uncovering the realm of closeness, we embraced every opportunity. Marriage discussions had been ongoing since the 11th grade, and we had made the decision to wait until college completion before officially getting married. College brought about a transformation in Aggie. In high school, our peers acknowledged our relationship, ensuring that Aggie was left undisturbed by the guys. However, this dynamic changed when we entered college. Although some familiar faces from high school were present, the majority of students came from different places. In this new environment, the guys no longer saw Aggie as exclusively mine. Instead, they perceived her as a desirable female, subject to constant attention. I was aware of the situation, but there wasn't much I could do. With different majors and classes, our interactions were limited to the evenings after classes and after I finished work. The attention had an impact on Aggie, making her more flirty. I observed her walking, smiling, and talking with other guys several times, but being on the other side of the quad, she didn't notice me. Twice, while taking a shortcut through the student union, I spotted Aggie in the cafeteria with a guy and once with two of them. It only dawned on me much later that I never saw her with other girls. It was always with guys. Nevertheless, it didn't worry me. After all, we were a couple in love, planning to get married, so there was nothing for me to fret about. She was an attractive girl, naturally drawing attention from guys. But she was mine, proving it every night when we were together, for years. Later, after graduating, finding jobs in our respective fields, getting married, and starting a life of wedded bliss, I enjoyed almost 6 years of contentment before a sudden revelation shook me awake. While at my desk, Molly from the mailroom placed some files in my basket. As I examined the top one, I wondered why it had been routed to me, given that it concerned an account handled by Wally Bergman, an old classmate from high school and college. Midway through, I discovered a major error, realizing the projections were off by almost $3 million. As I reached for my calculator, Wally rushed into my office, urgently seeking the file for a presentation to Apex. I showed him the error, and he appeared visibly concerned about the mistake. He expressed the urgency of revising it swiftly to avoid any potential consequences. Subsequently, he took the file and left hastily to make the necessary adjustments. It was Thursday, and Aggie always worked late to finalize payroll for the Friday payday. Following my routine, I visited Bud's bar after work for his half-pound ground round and a couple of beers before heading home. Completing my burger and starting my second beer, Wally entered, spotted me, and joined me in my booth. He ordered a beer from Sue and asked her to bring me the bill, mentioning it was a gesture of gratitude for helping him preserve his job earlier that day. I accepted without argument, considering it wasn't a substantial amount. We talked about work, covering various subjects such as whether we had seen certain individuals or heard about recent events. Then, Wally brought up a delicate matter. He expressed his view that I was a nice person and questioned why I tolerated Aggie's behavior. I was confused and told him I didn't understand what he meant. He persisted, asking why I allowed Aggie to behave the way she did. My puzzled response prompted him to realize that I was unaware of something significant. As he attempted to leave, I stopped him and insisted that he stay. I urged him not to leave after dropping such a bombshell. I asked him to sit back down and explain further. Wally complied, expressing his uncertainty and shock that I hadn't been aware of the situation for the past 10 years. When I asked him what he meant, he revealed that Aggie had a questionable reputation. I was too stunned to respond. Wally apologized, regretting that he had brought it up. However, I insisted that he continue and provide more details. He admitted to knowing about Aggie's behavior since high school and confessed his involvement with her. Shocked by this revelation, I insisted that he tell me everything from the beginning without leaving out any details. The unfolding story shocked me, not just the content, but the realization that it had been happening for over 10 years without my knowledge. 2 weeks after senior prom, Wally walked into his cousin George's house, finding George and Aggie together. They both saw him, and since neither objected, he undressed and waited his turn. They took turns until Aggie stopped and said she had to clean up before meeting me after my part-time job at Jessup's Market. Wally and George continued their encounters whenever I was at work. After George got serious with Melody Martin, Aggie was involved with Wally for a while. Then, finding her with Mike Bella and Justin Walsh, Wally joined in. The three of them continued until she had to stop for our meeting. Wally shared her with several others, and she had participated in group encounters with more than a half-dozen guys. I recognized that we were friends, but we weren't exactly best friends, you know? Remember the age of 18, when hormones were raging? You and Aggie were somewhat steady, but I didn't believe your relationship was that serious. I mean, if it were, would she be involved with anyone who showed interest? College didn't change that pattern. In the first semester as a freshman, Aggie had classes Monday through Thursday and Tuesday through Friday, with no classes on Wednesday. Her last class on weekdays ended at 2 or 1. I can't recall your schedule, but when you finished class, you went to work. When Aggie finished class, she headed to a bedroom somewhere. Wednesday turned into an all-day event throughout our school years. While class schedules varied, the constant was Aggie engaging after class until you finished work. I might be making it sound like an everyday occurrence, but it wasn't. 2 or 3 times a week, although most of us were surprised when you and Aggie got married, assuming you must have known what she had been doing. Yet you married her anyway. Some thought maybe you were into the idea of your women being with other men. Tyler speculated that perhaps you and Aggie were debauchees, but no one remembered seeing you with another girl. However, Aggie was frequently seen with other guys. I had no clue, Wally, not even a hint. Damn, Rob, I hate to be the one to inform you, but if you never knew, it stands to reason you probably don't know about her Thursday night date with Bob and Bill Howard. On the Tuesdays you bowl, she sees Mark Willard. I'm not sure who else she sees or when, but it's a sure bet that whenever you're off doing something, so is Aggie. It may not matter much, but I stopped being involved with her when you got married. A single woman is one thing, but messing around with a married woman is a whole different situation. I'm not sure what to say, Wally, and I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm definitely going to take some action. I finished my beer, stood up to leave, and turned to Wally. Thanks, Wally. Thanks for the burger, the beer, and for helping me gain clarity as I drove home. As I pondered Wally's revelations, I questioned whether to believe him. On one hand, I thought, no way. Aggie loves me, and she wouldn't betray me. On the other hand, why would Wally lie to me? I had to finally admit to myself that he wouldn't. He knew I'd verify what he told me, and if he had lied, how could we continue working together? The answer was, we couldn't, and Wally knew it. Working with him, aware of him and Aggie, would be challenging, but we'd eventually overcome it. I remembered the teenage years with hormones running high. If some other guy's girl offered back then, and I didn't have Aggie, I might have taken it. The real question now was, what the hell do I do, Rob? I didn't know that Aggie and I were finished. I might have managed a one-night drunken mistake, or maybe even a short-term affair, if Aggie could convince me it wouldn't happen again. But outright betrayal for 10 years? No way. I was lying in bed, pretending to be asleep as Aggie returned from handling the payroll. I ignored her touch when she reached out, as she wanted to give me leftovers, but I wasn't interested. Admittedly, I'd been receiving them for years without damage, but I didn't know that then. I do now. Her hand on my body made my skin crawl, and for the first time, I didn't get aroused when Aggie touched me. I was already up before Aggie the next morning, with coffee brewing and the morning paper in hand. Aggie asked what happened the previous night since she came home eager, and I was already in bed. Wally remarked that my behavior was unusual. I explained that I felt unwell because something I ate disagreed with me, so I decided to go to bed early. Aggie expressed hope for my recovery and mentioned I'd have to double duty tonight to make up for the missed night. Upon arriving at work, I immediately dialed Felix Mather, an old high school friend now practicing corporate law, though I wasn't quite sure what that entailed. I asked him for recommendations for an assertive divorce lawyer. He replied negatively, indicating that my request meant my hopeful assumption was incorrect. Discovering that I was looking for a divorce lawyer suggested that I had learned the truth about Aggie. He then questioned if I believed we had an open marriage, assuming that was the only way Aggie could engage in such behavior and still remain with me. Surprisingly, Felix, I had no idea about her actions until yesterday. After a brief pause, Felix suggested that I contact Tom Sweet and mention his referral. Accordingly, I followed Felix's advice and called Sweet, informing him about Felix's recommendation. He informed me he could meet later that day if I could be there by 1. I assured him I could, and indeed I did. Sweet informed me that I had various choices, ranging from a friendly separation to a scorched earth policy reminiscent of Attila the Hun. In our state, which was not a no-fault state, infidelity constituted valid grounds for divorce. However, obtaining a divorce based on infidelity required concrete and undeniable evidence. Mere hearsay wouldn't suffice. I inquired about how to gather the necessary evidence, to which Sweet responded by taking a card from his desk and passing it to me. The card belonged to Gaston Marshall, a private investigator whose office was conveniently located across the street. Sweet offered to contact Marshall to check if he could accommodate me promptly. I requested him to proceed, expressing my desire to conclude the process as quickly as possible. I also instructed him to start the divorce paperwork, promising to provide the evidence once I obtained it. Sweet made the call, and within 10 minutes, Gaston Marshall outlined our course of action. Unfortunately, one of the requirements was for me to act completely natural around Aggie, avoiding any suspicion that I was aware of the impending divorce. As unpleasant as it may be, Marshall advised, maintain your routine without changes. If you usually engage in lovemaking activities 3 or 4 times a week, continue to do so. Whether you typically initiate or not, keep it up. Just remember, it's no longer about making love. It's about fulfilling a physical need. Don't do anything that might disrupt her routine. It's crucial for our plan that she remains unaware of any changes in your relationship. I returned to my office, summoned my courage, and called Aggie. At work, it was our routine to dine out every Friday night and have breakfast every Sunday morning. So when I reached her on the phone, I suggested Tricochis for dinner, and she agreed. While I enjoyed my veal, Marcella and Aggie worked on her rigatoni, sipping white wine. Marshall Investigations employees were discreetly installing wireless cameras and listening devices in our house. Sipping my Merlot, I recalled Marshall's advice. It's natural to want to spot hidden cameras, but resist the urge. If she catches you, our efforts could be wasted. Also, force yourself to act natural in the bedroom, challenging unless you're a born exhibitionist. The system is sound and motion activated. You'll be on camera, knowing some employees may see you. Don't let it inhibit you. Although there's a switch to turn off the system at home, most forget to turn it back on when leaving. My advice, leave the system alone and pretend you're a confident star at work. After dinner, while making a private video, I suggested drinks and maybe some dancing to Aggie. She declined, insisting we head home for me to make up for letting her down the previous night. On the way home, she slid over, unzipped my pants, and cautioned, "Drive carefully, sweetie. Don't hit anything that might make me bite off your meat." In my mind, what she was doing wasn't unique for me, but something she had done with 100 other men over the last 10 years. Despite my disgust with Aggie, human nature took over a couple of minutes into the act, and my body responded, wanting her to continue and bring me to completion. Soon after, I pulled into our driveway, and Aggie urged me to hurry up to the bedroom. I couldn't adhere to Marshall's advice. There was no way I could act natural, knowing I might be performing for an audience. Trying to appear natural while being lovemaking with Aggie was going to be a challenge. So, I went to where I was told the switch would be and turned the system off. Leaving my cell phone on the car seat, I knew it would remind me to reactivate the system when I saw it upon leaving the house. I don't know if it registered with Aggie, but that night, it wasn't making love. It was just going through the motions. Unfortunately, once wasn't enough, and I had to perform 2 more times before Aggie let me sleep. The next morning, dressed for my run, Aggie reminded me she wouldn't be home when I returned, attributing it to a lengthy hair appointment from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. Aggie mentioned gossiping with other regulars and usually going to lunch with them. It could even be the truth. But after what I'd recently found out, I thought she probably met one of her extramarital partners either before or after getting her hair done. On my way out, I switched the system back on. I doubted anything would happen during my run, but I needed to form the habit of ensuring the system was active when I wasn't home. The switch only deactivated the cameras. The listening devices and phone tap were always on. After my usual 5 miles, returning home, I went down into the basement and opened the cabinet above my workbench. It's where I told Marshall to place the recorders. 2 receivers were inside, one for listening devices and the phone tap, the other a DVD recorder receiving input from the wireless cameras. Confirming my suspicions, I heard a recorded conversation. "Hello? Good morning, lover. Are we still on for today?" "You bet. The wife took the kids to the zoo, so we have until 6 tonight. You know I can't stay that long. I need to be home by 2. Any later and it might get Rob to wondering. He has already questioned the fact that I don't get home until 2. Then skip the hair job and get over here so we can make it happen." "Yeah, sure. Then what do I tell Rob when he asks why I've been gone so long and my hair hasn't been done?" "I want more time with you 2, baby, but we have to settle for what we can get." I recognized the man's voice. It was my cousin Lou. I was furious when I went back upstairs, wondering how many other relatives she had been involved with. I managed to control my anger by the time Aggie returned from her hair appointment. An hour later, I faked a fall down the basement stairs, telling Aggie I'd hurt my back. Must have pulled a muscle or something. This conveniently excused me from being lovemaking with her for the next couple of days at least. On Monday, I phoned Aggie at work and informed her that I would be leaving town on Tuesday, returning by Friday to take her out to dinner. Although there was no actual trip planned, I didn't view it as 3 wasted days. On average, I traveled once a month, and Aggie was consistently home during my nightly check and phone call. Since my calls occurred at irregular times, ranging from 7 to 10, I doubted she waited for them before going out. If she were cheating, as I'd been led to believe, she might be doing it on our bed while I spoke to her. That was my hope. If she was, and the cameras captured it, I'd have the irrefutable proof my attorney needed for the divorce action. That evening, Aggie desired closeness, stating, "I need something to hold me for the 3 nights you will be gone." Yeah, right. Fortunately, my back was still hurting, so I had to decline. On Tuesday morning, Aggie bid me farewell with a kiss and suitcase in hand. I left for my supposed business trip, working almost a full day before leaving at 3. I drove to our neighborhood, parked a block from the house, and using my laptop, entered a code Marshall had given me to activate the software he loaded onto my computer. A few keystrokes, and I was listening to the phone line recorder. "Hello? Hey, handsome honk, it's me. What's up? Hubby just left on a 3-day trip. You ready to spend 3 fun-filled nights with me? Does a duck walk barefoot on the beach? I'll take that as a yes. I leave it to you to call Tony. I've got to get out of here and get to work. I'll be home by 6. See you then." After shutting down the computer, I called Tom Sweet and instructed him to have the papers ready for service by Thursday, detailing how I wanted it done. He informed me that my preferred method would cost more than the standard service fee, to which I replied that I didn't care. Leaving the neighborhood, I drove to the other side of town and checked into a motel with a restaurant and a bar next door, settling in for a 3-day stay. I enjoyed the bar, my kind of place, bringing a big smile to my face each time I visited. Apologies to Toby Keith. It was a country western bar with a jukebox loaded with good tunes for dancing. Every night, I saw 3 or 4 unattached ladies who couldn't bear to see a man sitting alone while there was music to dance to. During my first visit, while sitting at the bar nursing a long neck, a great-looking redhead approached and said, "Come on, sugar, they're playing our song." She took my hand, pulled me off the bar stool, and led me onto the dance floor. As we waltzed, she clarified, "Don't get the wrong idea, sugar. I'm not tallying. I just love the dance. And you were there." Her name was Rhonda, and after the dance, she invited me to join her and her 2 friends, Laura and Shelby, at their table. I spent until 10:30 taking turns dancing with them, then informed them I had to call it a night. "Maybe we will see you again," Rhonda said. "We are in here 2 or 3 nights a week. I'm just next door in the motel, so it is likely that I will be in here the next 2 nights. I went to bed feeling positive for the first time since my conversation with Wally. The following afternoon at 3, I parked a block away from the house and reviewed the footage captured by the wireless cameras the previous night. The 2 men who joined Aggie in the bedroom were notably younger, at least 6 years her junior, and I wondered if Aggie was seeking youthful exuberance. The content was unremarkable, involving straightforward lovemaking activities. While the visual of Aggie with 2 men didn't particularly interest me, I was intrigued by the audio. I was surprised by what I heard, or rather, what I didn't hear. I expected Aggie to ridicule my lovemaking skills, but she never did. Wednesday was uneventful, with my presence only acknowledged when one of the men expressed a wish for more frequent meetings. Aggie clarified that I had priority for her time. However, I overheard Aggie telling them to leave the house by 6 in the morning on both Wednesday and Thursday. She emphasized the importance of avoiding being seen by the neighbors, as none of them were early risers. They left precisely at 6, and I assumed the same would occur on Friday. I called my attorney and had him change the serving of the papers until Friday at 5:45. Friday morning, I parked just down the street from the house at 5:55. When the front door opened, the 2 men came out. They turned to say goodbye to Aggie, who was standing just inside the door. And that is when they saw the man standing just off to the side. He stepped in front of the open door, served Aggie, and then turned and walked away, leaving Aggie and her 2 companions looking at his back. I pulled up in front of the house and honked the horn to make sure that I had Aggie's attention, and then I waved bye-bye and drove off. The papers served on Aggie were a letter from me to her. Basically, it said that I never wanted to speak to her again unless in the presence of our attorneys. I didn't want to know why. I didn't want to hear that she loved only me, and it was just meaningless closeness with the others. I didn't want to hear that it wasn't what I thought it was, and I didn't want to hear that we could get by it because of our love for each other. I did not want to hear any of the excuses cheaters come up with when caught. Of course, Aggie paid no attention to the letter, and 15 minutes after I had pulled away from the house, my cell rang, and it was Aggie. I let it go to voicemail, along with the next 7 calls from her. When I got to work, I told my secretary that I had left Aggie and not to put through any calls from her. I had another thought as I was opening my office door, and I turned back to her. Another thing, Martha. If she shows up here, please tell her that I'm not here. Tell her I've gone to meet with a customer. Martha stuck her head in the door. 5 minutes later, I talked to Iris on the front desk. If your wife shows up, she will call me and stall her to give you time to get out the side door. You can go to the cafe and have coffee until she leaves. I thanked her, and as she went back to her desk, I thought, and not for the first time, that a good secretary is a priceless thing to have. Aggie called me 17 times that day, and I ignored all the calls. At lunchtime, I phoned my dad and brother, updating them on the situation. I instructed Dad to inform Mom and asked her not to persuade me to reconcile with Aggie. He mentioned it would be challenging, since Mom viewed Aggie as the daughter she never had. By the day's end, I still had some pending work. Since there was no rush to go home, I opted to stay and finish it by 5. Martha informed me before leaving. By the way, your wife called 5 times before noon, and each time I told her I had instructions not to put her through to you. I think she finally got the message since she hasn't called since I finished around 7. Upon reaching the lobby, Iris was gone. Hank, our night watchman, saw me and commented, "Hot time on the town tonight with the missus. Why would you think that she is out there waiting on you?" I clarified, "We are getting a divorce, Hank, and she wants to talk, and I don't." I instructed him not to open the door if she knocked, and if she used the intercom, to say he was alone in the building. I added that my car was in the lot due to a breakdown, and a tow truck would arrive in the morning. Hank assured me he could handle it, expressing sympathy for the situation, and sharing he had been through 2 divorces. Exiting through the back door, I circled the block, crossed the street, and walked down the alley to Dave's Diner, entering and taking a seat. I positioned myself to observe Aggie waiting by my car, ordered the special, and kept an eye on her while eating. Halfway through dessert, she approached the building and pressed the call button on the intercom. Apparently, Hank conveyed my message as she returned to her car and left. After finishing dessert and having 1 more cup of coffee, I departed. I briefly stopped in the bar for a couple of beers. Despite a few ladies there alone, hoping for a dance partner, I had my 2 beers and left. Saturday morning proved busy as I attended to tasks I should have completed before serving Aggie. I just hoped I wasn't too late, and she hadn't taken action on what I should have done. I went to the bank and emptied all the accounts, retrieved my personal papers and certificates of deposit from the safe deposit box, leaving Aggie's belongings untouched. I removed my wedding ring, placing it in the box for her discovery. Afterward, I had breakfast at the Waffle House, using my cell phone to handle the credit cards. I canceled both joint cards, leaving me with a Visa and an American Express solely in my name. Aggie also had 2 cards in her name only. Thus, I ensured she couldn't run up joint cards with cash advances. After breakfast, I returned to the motel, parked my car, and called a cab to take me to the nearest Avis rental place. Renting the cheapest car available, I returned to the motel. I spent the afternoon lounging by the motel pool and reading a book. Just before dinner, I switched on my cell phone, finding 9 messages from Aggie. I cleared them and then turned the phone back off. For dinner, I had a light meal and then headed to the bar, which had a live band on Friday and Saturday, attracting a large crowd. Finding a seat at the bar, I ordered a beer. As I downed about half of it, I felt a tug on my shirt. Turning, I saw Rhonda. "Hey, cowboy, why are you sitting here when there is a seat at our table for you? To be honest, if I had seen you, I wouldn't have intruded on you. It would have seemed like I was taking things for granted." "Nonsense, come on." I got up and followed her to her table, where Laura and Shelby were also present. I sat down, greeted the girls, and then commented, "There seems to be something wrong with this picture. 3 beautiful women sitting alone and you aren't swamped with guys. We get a lot of attention, but it is usually from idiots. They see us here, notice the wedding rings, and assume we're here to cheat. We're just here to dance, and only a couple of guys understand that and accept it. The rest think they are God's gift to women, and we have to fend them off after the other night. We know that you are one of the good guys, and you have an open invitation to join us whenever you come in, and we are here. It isn't any of my business, and I know that, so feel free to tell me that. But I have to ask, why are 3 gorgeous married women spending time in a place like this without your husbands?" "It is a legitimate question," Rhonda said. "Laura's husband is in the Army Reserve, and his unit was sent to Afghanistan. She was going nuts cooped up in her house alone, so we decided to get her out. Shelby's husband works afternoons, and my hubby is a long-haul trucker who is often away, so the 3 of us banded together to keep each other company. We love to dance, and here we are. What's your story? I noticed you had a ring on last time we saw you, and now it is gone. I handed my wife divorce papers yesterday morning and left the ring where she'd find it. Does that mean you're free to pursue? Not at all. The grounds were infidelity, and I won't give her anything she could use against me in a countersuit," Laura remarked. "Great," she added. "We have a reliable dancing partner." The rest of the evening until closing, I danced with the 3 of them, occasionally sharing them with other guys. They agreed to meet on Sunday. I spent a quiet day by the pool with a book, and Monday I drove the rental car to work. I hoped Aggie wouldn't see my car, assuming I was out of town again and would stay away. The week passed with 6 to 10 calls daily from Aggie, which I never answered more than once. She called from unfamiliar numbers, but upon hearing her voice, I hung up. Each night after dinner, I stopped by the bar for a beer or 2. Rhonda, Laura, and Shelby were there on Wednesday and Friday, so I joined them, dancing until 10 on Wednesday and until closing on Friday. I figured by Saturday, Aggie would realize I wasn't going to talk to her, so I turned in my rental and drove my car to work on Monday. A mistake. Monday, she was parked next to my car when I left the building. Spotting me, she got out and stood by my car's driver's side door. She mentioned that we needed to talk, but I didn't respond. As I approached the car, she moved to block the door, insisting that I let her explain. I pushed her aside, causing her to stumble but regain her balance quickly. I rolled down the window and informed her that she needed to read the letter accompanying the divorce papers. I asserted that I wouldn't engage in any conversation without my attorney present, and that any discussion would strictly concern the divorce. Aggie expressed her unwillingness to divorce and her lack of desire for me. I reiterated that our relationship was over and that she needed to accept it because I wouldn't change my mind. After rolling up the window, I drove away, leaving her behind. Aggie's refusal to accept my decision became apparent when I left work on Tuesday. 2 men approached my car and grabbed my arms. I recognized them as the individuals who had been with Aggie in our bedroom. One of them warned me not to resist, stating that Aggie wanted to talk, and since I was being difficult, they would take me to her by any means necessary. Though only a few years older, they must have thought me soft due to my suit and briefcase. I figured I could handle them. They wouldn't expect an old guy to resist, so I could catch them off guard. Either way, the commotion would draw attention, and their kidnapping plan would fail. But then I pondered, do I truly desire this? If Aggie was willing to go to such lengths just to reach Octomy, what might she attempt next? If I sent these 2 back to her battered and bruised? They nudged me into my car, and I sat between them, a briefcase on my lap, as they drove to the house. They escorted me inside, and Aggie instructed them to seat me in a chair and ensure I remained there. She turned to me and announced that we wouldn't be getting a divorce. As I attempted to rise from the chair, the 2 men pushed me back down and restrained me. One of them warned me to stay still. Aggie declared that we would remain married, but that there would be changes in our lifestyle due to her medical issue, which I had discovered. She expressed regret that I had found out about it, but insisted that I had to accept it, now that I knew. She then confessed her love for me, asserting that she wouldn't let me go. She revealed that her medical issue was nymphomania, which she had suffered from since high school. Aggie attributed the onset of her condition to when I took her pureness. I dismissed her statement, suggesting that there were medications available to address her condition, She acknowledged that such medications existed, but explained that she had tried them all. She found them ineffective as they made her feel sluggish and dull, likening the experience to being a zombie. Despite this, she admitted that she enjoyed being a nymphomaniac and emphasized her love for closeness, asserting that she hardly ever left me alone. She argued that her actions didn't damage me and that she spoiled me. Aggie reasoned that since I couldn't maintain arousal constantly, she needed to seek it elsewhere, and assured me that she always returned to me because she loved me. She outlined her terms, explaining that she had drafted a post-nuptial agreement, allowing her to have as many lovers as necessary for her mental well-being. She proposed that I agree to leave the marriage with nothing if I later found the conditions unacceptable. In return, she asked what she would receive besides having a promiscuous wife. I responded by assuring her that she would continue to have the same loving wife she had for the past 6 years. I reminded her that she had considered those years perfect despite my actions, which were now causing an issue. I suggested that the only change was that my ego was now involved, as someone else was involved in something I had previously considered mine alone. I urged her to accept that our life would continue as it had for the last 6 years. Aggie emphasized that my inability to meet her physical needs didn't mean I wasn't man enough for her. She praised me as a fantastic lover who always left her completely satisfied. However, she acknowledged that I couldn't satisfy her as often as she needed. I addressed her by her full name, aware of her aversion to it. Reluctantly agreeing to sign the agreement with a few amendments, I voiced my concerns about our lack of closeness and expressed my need for her presence in our bed. Despite my plea and reassurance of my love for her, she seemed unwavering in her stance. With a heavy heart, I accepted her offer to make the necessary changes, hoping it might salvage some of our crumbling relationship. As I attempted to rise from my chair, the 2 men accompanying her obstructed my path, leaving me feeling trapped and powerless. When I mentioned needing to use the bathroom, one of them callously suggested I relieve myself where I sat, citing Aggie's directive to keep me seated until further notice. Aggie returned after 5 minutes, read the document aloud, and I asked where to sign. She offered a pen, but I mentioned her associates preventing me from standing and instructed them to stand. Rising, I approached her, placed my briefcase on the table, and took the pen. However, I decided to review it myself to ensure its contents matched her description. After reading it, I chuckled, tore it up, and tossed it back at her. I grabbed my briefcase and headed for the door. Aggie yelled to stop me, and her 2 associates pursued. As they neared, I swiftly turned toward them with my briefcase, targeting the first guy's head. It was a solid hit, sending him down. The second guy was taken off guard, and I punched him in the mouth, causing him to stagger backward. Then, I delivered a forceful kick to his groin, and he collapsed. Understanding the need to keep them subdued in a 2-against-1 scenario, I continued to strike both of them. I alternated between kicking them in sensitive areas and striking their ribs and head until Aggie screamed for me to stop or she'd shoot. Glancing at her, I noticed she was aiming a weapon at me. Defiantly, I challenged her to shoot. I retrieved my cell phone, dialed emergency, provided my name and address, and informed the operator of my wife's armed threat. The operator advised me to remain calm and not provoke her, ensuring help was on the way. After ending the call, I sarcastically thanked Agnes, suggesting her incarceration would expedite our divorce. She criticized my action as foolish. Agnes warned me that when the police arrived, I would be the one facing arrest. She accused me of entering and attacking her friends out of jealousy, stating that it would be my word against theirs and that they were fully clothed. I mocked her response, questioning her love for me. She assured me not to worry. I countered by stating that I would bail out and that Barry and Tony wouldn't press charges. I reminded Agnes that Hank and Joyce witnessed the 2 individuals picking me up from work and escorting me inside. I accused her of having me brought there against my will and hindering me when I tried to leave, despite her companion's failure. Then she pulled a weapon on me. I explained that although I might spend a night in jail, when my witnesses testified, she would be the one behind bars, and I wouldn't be posting her bail. I advised her that considering the situation, including kidnapping, false imprisonment, weapon threats, and likely other charges, her best course of action would be to stay silent. Aggie ignored my advice and, along with her associates, fabricated their stories. Consequently, I was taken into custody. The next morning, I called Tom Sweet, briefed him on the situation, and instructed him to collaborate with Gaston Marshall, obtain the evidence, and take appropriate action. Aggie realized she couldn't bail me out until I appeared before a judge, which wouldn't occur until Monday. Tom had a friend who worked as an assistant district attorney. He showed him the tapes of what happened at the house, which depicted Barry and Tony restraining me while Aggie aimed a weapon at me. The ADA overheard Aggie admitting she planned to lie and have her two accomplices do the same. When Aggie showed up at the courthouse for my bail hearing on Monday morning, she got arrested. Warrants were issued for Barry and Tony, and they were behind bars by nightfall. I refused to post bail for Aggie, and her parents couldn't come up with the money either. Aggie obtained a lawyer who contacted me and suggested a bail bondsman wanted me to use the house as collateral for her bond. I dismissed the suggestion and hung up. I checked out of the motel and moved back home, then had all the locks changed since Aggie had threatened me with a weapon. Tom managed to get a restraining order against Aggie in case she somehow got out of jail. She couldn't come within 1,000 feet of me without facing arrest and being sent back to jail. As tempting as it might have been to reconcile with Aggie, it wasn't worth risking serious jail time. Both Barry and Tony flipped on Aggie and took plea deals. Aggie claimed she never intended to shoot me. She was just trying to stop me from hurting Barry or Tony so badly that I'd end up in jail. The jury watched the tape, and based on Aggie's expressions of love for me, believed she was probably telling the truth about trying to prevent me from damaging Barry or Tony. They acquitted her of the felony menacing charge, but found her guilty of unlawful restraint and filing a false police report, along with a few minor charges. The judge sentenced her to 9 months in county jail and 1,000 hours of community service upon release. While she was in jail, the divorce proceedings wrapped up smoothly. Aside from losing Aggie, I only forfeited 20% of the equity in the house. I transferred the money to her bank account and headed to the bar next to the motel where I'd been staying. Luck was on my side. Rhonda and Shelby were there, so I invited them to celebrate my newfound freedom with me. Laura wasn't around because her husband had returned from deployment, and they were busy catching up. "Why celebrate with us?" Rhonda asked. "Well, I'm taking a wild guess here. I noticed Laura's wedding ring and Shelby's too, but you, Rhonda, aren't wearing a ring, and I don't see any signs you ever wore one, so I'm guessing there's no long-haul trucker in your life. Plus, I've always had a thing for gorgeous redheads." Shelby chuckled and teased, "Girl, you're busted," as I pulled Rhonda onto the dance floor.